It starts with silence. You're lying there, lights off, and suddenly something old, something forgotten, starts to tug at the edges of your mind. You feel it, don't you? The weight of stories never told. The sound of bones shifting under centuries of dirt. A breathless moment that has lasted thousands of years, waiting for someone, maybe you, to finally listen. Beneath the floorboards of history, there are skulls with horns, scrolls made of silver, baby bones wrapped in ash, hands cast in bronze and buried with intention. A black sarcophagus sealed so tightly the air inside hadn't moved in 2 millennia. These aren't myths. They aren't bedtime stories made up to frighten or comfort you. These are real things discovered, documented, then quietly shoved to the side because no one wants to admit they don't make sense. And maybe that's the point. Because what do you do when the facts you uncover don't fit the version of history you've built your life around? What do you do with a jade needle buried in a woman's hand, carved long before jade needles should have existed? Or an idol with 3 eyes found in a chamber where no light reaches and no explanation follows? You probably don't survive that realization, not comfortably anyway. So, before you get too cozy, before we wander too far into this softly whispering void, take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really like what I'm doing here. No pressure. Just know that once you start this journey, you may not look at the past or the dark corners of your own room the same way again. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. That's always fun. You might not be alone in this little ghost boat of mystery and warm blankets. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started on tonight's journey together. It begins in a quiet field in Pennsylvania where nothing ever happens except once when something impossible did. The ground was soft. The archaeologists were untrained. The skulls they found were large and human, except for one thing. Each had smooth, symmetrical horns, not scars, not injuries. Horns. Like the kind you'd find on something that wasn't supposed to be real. They say the past whispers to those who listen, but sometimes it stares back. The sun is warm on your back as you shuffle along the edge of a Pennsylvania field, boots sinking into the early spring soil. A few cows blink lazily from a distant hill, and a white farmhouse leans against the horizon like it's trying to fall asleep. You'd think this place had never held a secret in its life, but the ground disagrees. It's the late 1800s, and a group of antiquarians think nerdy gentlemen with too much free time and just enough mustache wax have gathered at the edge of town near Sleepp, Pennsylvania. They've heard rumors of burial mounds on the outskirts, low grassy rises scattered across the countryside like forgotten knuckles of the earth. Some say they belong to the ancient mound builders, a prehistoric culture whose massive earthworks once stretched across what is now the eastern United States. Others say they're just bumps in the land, so the team begins digging. At first, it's routine bones, pottery, fragments, the occasional rusted tool. But then just beneath the top layer, someone hits a skull. Normal, right? Except it isn't. It's large, not cartoonishly so, but enough to make everyone stop chewing their pipe stems for a second. They brush more dirt away. The skull is elongated at the back, stretched almost elegant, like the cranium had grown upward and backward. Skull binding, maybe. That's a known practice in some ancient cultures. They'd wrap the heads of infants in cloth to elongate the skull as it grew, often for status or beauty. But then the light catches something just above the brow. 2 symmetrical ridges, smooth, rounded, bone, horns, real horns, each about 2 inches long. Now this is where the soil seems to breathe. You can almost hear it. The soft gasp of the earth exhaling a secret it never wanted to share. The team stares. Someone mutters, it's a deformity, a bone growth, an anomaly. But then they find another, and another. Eventually, up to 7 of these horned skulls are uncovered, each one showing the same traits: elongated craniums, unusual size, and those odd smooth protrusions above the eyes. If reconstructed, the individuals would stand close to 7 feet tall. Not unheard of, but rare, and unsettling when paired with their strange cranial shapes. What's more, the burial goods are ordinary, not grand, not royal, just tools, fragments, the occasional beaded trinket. Whoever these people were, they weren't buried like kings. But their bones tell a very different story. According to the few reports that survived, the skulls were boxed up and sent to the American Investigating Museum in Philadelphia for further study. Photographs were taken, notes were written, and then poof, everything vanished. The museum denied ever receiving the items. Researchers who inquired were met with blank stares or polite dismissals. No records, no bones, no photos, just silence. So, what happened? Some say it was all a hoax. The late 19th century was, after all, a golden age of tall tales. Newspaper men had a flair for fiction. But if that's the case, why the consistency? Why 7 nearly identical skulls, each with the same deformities? Why bother faking something so oddly specific? Skeptics argue they were simply misidentified or part of an ancient head-binding culture. But while elongated skulls are found in Peru, Mexico, and even parts of Eastern Europe, the horns are another matter entirely. There's no known culture anywhere that practiced artificial horn growth. And these weren't bone fused with jewelry or metal implants. These were biological extensions. Bone seamlessly joined to the rest of the cranium. Of course, fringe theorists have had a field day. Some believe the horned skulls belong to a race of giants, remnants of a forgotten lineage. Nephilim, they whisper. Biblical hybrids of human and something else. Others tie the story to Native American oral traditions, which speak of tall, horned beings in isolated tribal myths. Creatures who walked upright but weren't quite human. Warriors. Spirits. Warnings. And then there's the conspiracy crowd. They say the skulls were real, all right. Too real. And that's why they were taken. Hidden away in dusty museum basements, suppressed by institutions afraid to rewrite the narrative of human history. The version that says, we evolved neatly, cleanly, predictably, from apes to Homo sapiens. No interruptions, no outliers, no horns. But imagine, just for a moment, that it was true. That once, long before written language, or railroads, or Sunday newspapers, there was a species or a branch of us that looked different, thought different, maybe even ruled a corner of the world quietly before vanishing beneath time's rug. You picture them walking the riverbanks of ancient Pennsylvania, 7 feet tall, with smooth horns cresting from their brows like natural helmets. Maybe they lived alongside early humans. Maybe they were revered. Maybe they were feared. Maybe they were hunted. And now, maybe they're forgotten. The men who found the skulls, they've long since passed. Their notes are lost or hidden, or maybe burned. The burial mound itself has likely been flattened by farmland or paved over by some sleepy road. A place you might drive past today without ever knowing what once lay beneath your wheels. But the story remains, not in textbooks, not in tour guides, just here, in a quiet corner of the past that never quite closed its door. Somewhere perhaps there's still a crate, unlabeled, dull wood, rough edges stacked behind museum crates, filled with more acceptable histories. Inside, wrapped in old cloth and surrounded by silence, could be a skull with smooth horns and empty sockets that saw something we'll never understand, because not every mystery is meant to be solved. Some are meant to whisper from the soil. Some are meant to be buried. And some are just waiting. You're kneeling in the dirt. It's soft black and smells faintly of rain. There's a chill in the breeze, even though the sun is warm on your neck. Someone calls your name quietly, not out of urgency, but reverence. You stand, brush your knees, and walk over. At first, it doesn't look like much. Just two skeletons half buried in the earth, outside the small village of Valdaro in northern Italy. But as you get closer, your breath catches a little in your throat, because these two skeletons, so fragile, so old, are facing each other. Their arms gently curve inward. One skull leans in toward the other, the foreheads almost touching. Knees drawn up, like they fell asleep holding each other. No violence, no chaos, just stillness. It's hard not to feel like you're intruding on something deeply personal. They lived around 6,000 years ago, during the Neolithic period, a time when farming was still. New stone tools were cutting-edge tech, and life was quite frankly short. These were days of hard labor, disease, hunger, and cold. The odds of growing old weren't great. So the idea that someone in that distant world took the time to arrange a burial, this tender, it's almost too much. They call them the lovers of Valdaro. Of course they do. How could they not? But here's where it gets stranger. As the soil is brushed away, something catches the archaeologist's eyes. A faint, light-colored dusting over the skeletons. Not random sediment, not ash from modern pollution. No, this was intentional. It's ash, not burnt remains, not cremation. Just a fine sprinkling, delicate, purposeful, layered over the bodies before they were buried. Not enough to obscure them, just enough to coat them like some kind of sacred blanket. And now, your brain starts to hum with questions. Where did it come from? A hearth? A ritual fire? A lightning-split tree? No one knows. And more importantly, why? Ash has long been a symbol of transformation. Across cultures, it's used to mark transitions, life to death, body to spirit, memory to myth. Maybe the people who buried these two believed the ash would help carry their souls into the next world. Or maybe it was a way to preserve the moment, to trap it like amber so it wouldn't be lost. The skeletons themselves show no signs of trauma. No broken bones, no blade, marks no evidence of war or sickness. They may have died together. They may have died separately. But in death, they were brought together, reunited, arranged, honored. There were no weapons buried with them. No tools. No ornate jewelry or elite markings. Just two young people, maybe 18, maybe 20, laid in a shallow grave, arms nearly intertwined. Were they lovers, siblings, friends? We'll never know, and maybe that's what makes it ache a little more. Because they're frozen in a moment so familiar, so intimate, and yet so utterly alien. No names, no backstory. Just bones that used to carry laughter and breath and heartbeat now locked in stillness. But the ash tells us something. It tells us this wasn't an accident. Someone cared. Someone stood there all those millennia ago and carefully dusted these bodies with the gray whisper of fire. They took their time. They made it ceremonial. And now, in a museum display in Mantua, they lie exactly as they were found, still curled together, still surrounded by the echo of that silent ritual. Visitors walk by, some in awe, some in tears, some quietly shaking their heads, because they don't quite know why this hits them the way it does. But you can feel it, right? Because it's not just the romance, it's the mystery, the why. Who buried them this way? What did it mean? Was this an act of rebellion? Young lovers cast out by their tribe, a tragic accident, two friends caught in a storm, found and memorialized by their families, or a symbolic gesture, two people never connected in life but joined in death to represent something greater. Balance, duality, eternity. Historians still debate it. Some point to other Neolithic graves with paired skeletons and argue this was part of a broader ritual. Others say this one is unique, too specific, too intimate to be tradition. The ash complicates things. It isn't found in other similar graves. That single detail suggests this wasn't just burial. It was theater, performance, meaning. And if that's true, then the people who laid these two down weren't just digging a hole in the ground. They were telling a story. One we're still trying to interpret. Now imagine the night after the burial. The fire has burned down to embers. The earth is still fresh. The village is quiet. And the people who performed the burial ceremony walk away, slowly, thoughtfully. Maybe they whisper a prayer. Maybe they don't speak at all. And above the dirt, the ash clings to the air, a final veil between life and whatever waits beyond. The years pass. Grass grows. Trees fall. New generations rise, forget, move on. The world spins through war and empire, through invention and erasure. And somewhere beneath a plowed field in northern Italy, two skeletons lie motionless, in a position too tender to forget, until someone finds them. And suddenly, the moment is alive again. The ash still clings to their bones. The position still evokes a breathless hush from everyone who sees it. And the silence, oh, the silence, it's loud in its mystery. Because here's the thing. Bones don't lie. They can't. They sit in the earth patient, unblinking, unmoved. But they don't tell you everything either. They leave gaps, spaces, questions that stretch longer than the timeline of civilization. And that's what makes them powerful. We're not just staring at two ancient bodies. We're staring at a moment someone wanted us to remember. Not their names, not their status, not their accomplishments. Just a single act of closeness, preserved in ash, buried in time. Maybe that's why this image stays with you long after the museum doors close. It speaks not to your mind, but to your bones, to the part of you that understands what it means to hold someone close and to not want to let go, even if the world ends, especially if the world ends. So, tonight, as you lie in bed, eyes closed, heart slowed, picture them not as skeletons, but as people. Warm once, breathing, laughing, maybe whispering secrets, maybe just sitting in silence together. Now, they sleep in the earth, their story unfinished, their ash untouched, still, quiet, together. You're walking through ruins now, though you wouldn't know it at first. The ground looks ordinary, just dirt and scattered stones. A few wildflowers push up between the cracks, but then you feel it. That low hum beneath your boots. Not noise exactly. A kind of pressure, like the air is holding its breath. This is Avaris, once the bustling capital of the Hyksos rulers in ancient Egypt. And buried beneath your feet, just past the crumbling walls of a long-lost palace, lies something wrong. Not a curse, not a tomb. Hands, bronze ones. You kneel at the edge of the dig site, where the team has marked off several small square pits. Shallow, just a few feet deep. But inside, each one nestled neatly in the earth, is a human hand. Not made of flesh or bone. Not severed in violence. These are cast in solid bronze. Fingers slightly curled, palms facing upward. Life-sized, anatomically precise. And they're alone. No bodies, no arms, no statues they once belonged to. Just hands, dozens of them, buried deliberately beneath the palace foundation. The first thought is sacrifice. That's what history tells us to expect. Severed hands offered to kings as proof of victory. A trophy, a boast. Something gruesome, but understandable. War has never been subtle, but then you look closer. These hands aren't mutilated. They're beautiful. Delicately crafted with fine details, the folds of the knuckles, the shape of the nails, even faint creases in the palms. They weren't made quickly. They weren't made angrily. Someone took their time. And suddenly, the idea of violence feels out of place. Because this wasn't war. This was worship. Now let's zoom out. The Hyksos weren't native Egyptians. They came from the east, possibly Canaan, bringing with them new technologies, chariots, composite bows, strange foreign gods. They ruled parts of Egypt for over a century, leaving behind few monuments, but plenty of mystery. Their palace in Avaris was grand. Wide courtyards, colonnades, ceremonial halls. But beneath its stones, specifically beneath thresholds and audience chambers, archaeologists began finding these bronze hands. One per pit. Each buried in a place where people would walk over them unknowingly for generations. So what were they doing there? One theory suggests loyalty. Imagine a general kneeling before his king, hand outstretched in oath. Except instead of just swearing once he makes it permanent. Has his hand cast in bronze and buries it beneath the palace, an eternal gesture of fealty. Beautiful, poetic, but also terrifyingly final. Another theory points to ritual magic. In some ancient cultures, builders placed symbolic objects under the foundations of buildings. Animal bones, shards of pottery, even human, remains meant to guard the structure, to bind it spiritually to the earth. Maybe the hands were protective talismans. Maybe they weren't about honoring the king, but about defending him. And here's where it gets even stranger. Not all the hands were the same. Some were large, broad, powerful, clearly modeled after male warriors. But others were slender, delicate, feminine. A few were even child-sized. What does that mean? Were these the hands of the people? A cross-section of a city's population offered in metal as a way of binding the community to the palace? Or were they modeled after someone specific? One researcher floated the theory that these weren't symbolic at all. They were replicas, literal copies of actual hands poured molded cast, like an ancient fingerprint, a record of someone's presence, maybe even their identity. You stare down at one of them now, its fingertips peeking from the edge of the pit palm open to the sky. It almost looks like it's waiting, not for war, not for prayer, but for acknowledgement. Let's pause and talk about symbolism. In ancient Egypt and many other cultures, The hand was more than just anatomy. It was power, creation, destruction. The hand feeds, the hand writes, the hand strikes. And in religion, it's the hand of God, the touch that blesses or banishes, a gesture that lives long after the voice is gone. So, to bury hands in the floor of a palace, that means something binding, something deep. But here's the mystery: the Egyptians themselves didn't do this. There are no other known examples of bronze hand burials in traditional Egyptian temples or royal sites. No carvings, no texts, no tomb paintings. This wasn't part of mainstream ritual. It was something brought in, something foreign, something that disappeared when the Hyksos were expelled. Which raises a chilling thought. Did the Egyptians erase it on purpose? After they retook Avaris, many of the Hyksos monuments were defaced. Their gods removed their names, scratched out of history. Maybe the bronze hands were part of a belief the Egyptians didn't want remembered, a faith so different, so alien, that the safest course was to bury it again, this time with silence. And that silence has lasted nearly 4,000 years. Until now, archaeologists still debate the purpose of the hands. Some cling to the war trophy idea. Others argue for ritual loyalty. A few suggest a funerary link, that the hands were meant to guide spirits into the afterlife, or perhaps to hold them in place. And then, there's the most out there theory of all, that the hands weren't for the living. They were for the dead, a message not to gods or kings, but to the ancestors. A gesture across time. We remember. We serve. We offer this part of ourselves to you, not a literal part, not severed flesh, but the symbol of a hand, the tool of life, cast in bronze, buried in stillness. Tonight, as you lie, still picture them, not in pits, not as artifacts, but as echoes, dozens of them, lined beneath the stones of a ruined palace. Their fingers outstretch, their palms open, waiting, and maybe still listening. You duck your head and step into cool stone silence. The ceiling curves low. The air is damp and earthy, and each footstep sends a whisper down the hall. You're not in a cave. You're in a temple, carved, not built. A place older than almost anything else on Earth. This is Malta. More specifically, the Hal Saflieni Hypogeum, a subterranean sanctuary older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, older even than the idea of history as we know it. And somewhere deep within these carved limestone chambers, someone found a statue, not large, not jeweled, just stone, smooth, ancient, humble. A rounded head, folded arms, a heavy body that almost slouches in stillness. You might have missed it if not for one thing. It has 3 eyes, 2 normal human eyes, and then centered on the forehead, a 3rd one. Carved clean and clear, not a crack, not an accident. An eye, staring forward and upward at the same time. No one knows why. Let's step back. The hypogeum isn't just old. It's acoustically precise. Stand in certain rooms and speak at the right pitch, and your voice vibrates through the entire complex. Not randomly, but rhythmically. As if the builders knew sound the way modern engineers understand steel. Imagine that. Thousands of years ago, someone carved a temple underground, aligned it with solar cycles, tuned it to human frequency, and then tucked away a little statue with a 3rd eye. What were they trying to see? The 3-eyed idol wasn't found in a place of glory. It wasn't sitting on an altar or displayed in ceremonial light. It was buried in a chamber that only the most initiated would have reached. A place of stillness deeper than sunlight, where ochre spirals decorate the walls and silence presses like velvet against your ears. Archaeologists believe the hypogeum was both a burial site and a spiritual sanctuary. Bones have been found in niches, small offerings, tools, animal remains, figurines, but only one has a third eye. That's not coincidence. That's intention. Let's talk about third eyes. In modern spirituality, it's associated with inner vision, enlightenment, connection to something beyond the physical world. But this statue predates all that. It came before Hinduism, before Buddhism, before the Vedic texts ever spoke of chakras or energy flows. So what does it mean when the oldest known temple contains a statue with a third eye? Some researchers believe it was symbolic, a representation of shamanic sight, someone who could see what others couldn't. Others think it's linked to altered states of consciousness. The hypogeum may have been used for rituals involving sound rhythm, even mild hallucinogens. The chambers, the spirals, the acoustics, it all points to a deliberate attempt to change perception. So the third eye. Maybe it wasn't just about vision. Maybe it was about awareness, a way of marking the transition between body and spirit, or life and death. But there are stranger theories too. A few fringe researchers suggest the statue doesn't represent a human at all, that the proportions are off, the limbs too thick, the torso too round, the facial features barely present. The third eye, not symbolic, but anatomical. A record of something or someone they actually saw. That sounds wild, sure, but remember this isn't the only unusual figure found on Malta. There are dozens more. They call them the fat ladies, though most have no discernible gender. They're round abstract, sometimes headless, seated, reclining, almost always heavy-limbed, as if solidity itself was sacred. But none have a third eye, only this one. So again, we ask why. Let's go back to how it was found. It wasn't placed with honor. It wasn't displayed for worship. It was hidden, deep, dusty, deliberately buried in a chamber so far from the surface that few would ever stumble across it. And yet, when it was uncovered, it was almost perfectly preserved, as if it had been waiting. Let's get stranger. In the oracle room, a chamber in the hypogeum, known for its unique acoustic properties, experiments have shown that chanting in specific tones causes the walls themselves to vibrate, not metaphorically, physically. The frequency of human male voice at 110 Hz causes resonance throughout the structure. Now picture a ritual there. Darkness. Torches flickering. A steady hum that buzzes against your chest. And somewhere in that room, this idol, small stone, three-eyed, placed at the center of the sound. A focus point, a portal, a mirror. Historians still debate whether the builders of the hypogeum were the ancestors of later Mediterranean civilizations or a separate culture entirely, one that vanished without clear trace. No written language, no known name. But they left this place behind, and they left the idol behind too. Today, it sits in a display case. People walk by, they glance, some stop, some stare. Most don't know what they're looking at. Just a small statue, pale, smooth, unassuming, but it's still watching. You can almost feel it, can't you? That quiet gaze from the center of the forehead, not threatening, not even curious, just aware. Maybe that's what the third eye really is. Not a symbol of power, not a beacon for gods, just a reminder to notice, to see what others ignore, to sense what lies just beneath the surface of the known. Or maybe it's something older than all of that, something waiting. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, picture the hypogeum, cool stone, red spirals on the ceiling, the slow echo of breath against rock, and at the far end of a dark corridor, a figure sits, small, still, 3 eyes open, one of them looking directly into the part of you that still believes the world is explainable. You crouch at the edge of a shallow trench, the air around you still as bone. The dig site is unremarkable, just another Bronze Age burial in Central Europe, marked by stone slabs and patches of uneven grass. You've uncovered dozens like it, but this one is different. This one isn't just bones and dust. This one hisses. You brush away more soil. First come the ribs, delicate curved, beautifully intact. Then the skull, gently tilted as if resting on its side. The bones lie in a position of rest, not violence, a quiet kind of death. But as your trowel moves lower, it clinks against something unexpected, curved, thin, ribbed. At first, you think it's a root. But as you expose more of it, the truth coils into view. It's a snake. More specifically, the skeleton of a snake, perfectly preserved, each vertebra curled in and around the human remains like a lover's embrace. It doesn't lie beside the body. It isn't tangled through it by accident. It's woven. It wraps around the rib cage, slides beneath the pelvic bone, arches up through the spine, and loops through the arms. It's deliberate, and immediately your mind starts to race, because this isn't how snakes die. Snakes slither. They writhe. They flee. They don't curl themselves in perfect spirals through human bones and politely fossilize for 3,000 years. Not unless someone placed it that way. So now the question isn't what you found. It's why. Let's pause and breathe with that image, a human skeleton buried in rest, cradled by a snake like it was part of the burial ritual. No signs of violence, no shattered ribs. The bones weren't broken by force, and neither was the serpent's. Their arrangement is too precise to be chance. This is not nature. This is ceremony. Across the ancient world, snakes have always slithered through myth. In Mesopotamia, they were symbols of eternal life. In Greece, they wound around healing staffs. Asclepius, the god of medicine, wielded a serpent-entwined rod. In Egypt, they guarded the pharaoh, encircling his crown as the uraeus, watchful, divine, and dangerous. Snakes were sacred and sometimes feared. In prehistoric European traditions, serpents were linked to the earth, to the underworld, to cycles of death and rebirth. Some believe they were messengers, others jailers. Some myths whisper that they tether the soul to the body after death or guard the grave to keep something in. So what does it mean when a snake is found not near a burial, but within it? Theory 1, the snake was buried alive. It's grim, yes, but not impossible. In a few ancient cultures, animals were entombed alongside the dead, sometimes as companions, sometimes as guardians, and sometimes as offerings. Imagine a ritual in which a snake was placed into the grave just before sealing left to coil around the departed. But the evidence doesn't support a struggle. The snake's skeleton is perfectly aligned. No fractures, no signs of thrashing. If it died there, it died peacefully, which leads us to theory 2. The snake was already dead, placed intentionally around the body. A symbol, a spell, a message. The way its bones loop through the human remains is almost artistic, like someone arranged the body and then carefully draped the snake over and through it, weaving them together into something larger than life or death. And here's a chilling thought. Maybe this was a merging, a ritual union between human and serpent. Maybe they believed that in death, this person would take on the serpent's qualities, slippery, eternal, impossible to pin down. Or perhaps the snake was meant to carry the soul to the next world, a spiritual vehicle, cold-blooded and holy. Let's look at the skeleton. The human appears middle-aged, possibly male. No signs of disease, no elite markers, no gold, no weapons, no tools, just a simple burial and the snake, which suggests this wasn't a status symbol. It wasn't about wealth. It was about belief. And belief, when left unspoken, becomes mystery. Some researchers suggest a third theory: the snake was used as a form of magical binding, that the grave wasn't meant to honor the dead, but to contain them. In Slavic and Celtic legends, there are whispers of cursed souls, those who must be tethered to the earth lest they rise again. In those stories, snakes often play the role of the jailer, not the guide. Could this be a punishment? A warning. Let's go darker. The Bronze Age wasn't peaceful. Famine, tribal conflict, collapsing trade routes, burials from the period often reflect a desperation we rarely talk about. Sometimes, people died in fear. Sometimes, they were buried in it. Could this man have been feared, revered? Was the snake a mark of shame or protection? Or both? We don't know. And maybe that's the real terror, because bones can tell you how someone died, but they rarely tell you why. And when you find something this precise, this poetic, you're forced to sit with the silence, to stare into the coils and ask a question that may have no answer. What was this for? Some scientists point to the serpent's placement along the spine and torso and suggest a symbolic rebirth, a shedding of skin, a passage. In this reading, the snake isn't death, it's transition. The human didn't die with the snake. They became it, but others aren't so sure. In the end, this grave remains a riddle. No inscriptions, no patterns, no copies found elsewhere. Just one quiet burial that doesn't fit any known tradition. The site has been cataloged, photographed, documented. The bones are in a controlled facility, now studied and restudied. But the snake remains what it was the day it was found, a question that hisses in your ear long after the lights go out. So tonight, as your body settles beneath warm blankets and your breath slows to match the rhythm of the dark picture, the stillness of that grave, the human bones pale and hollow, the serpent skeleton coiled in eternal patience, not threatening, not kind, just there, and maybe still guarding something you were never meant to find. The first thing that hits you is the weight, not emotional weight, not metaphor. Actual weight, 30 tons of it. You're standing in a dusty construction site in Alexandria, Egypt. In the distance, cars buzz past cracked sidewalks. A plastic bag floats through the air like a lost ghost. Nothing about this place suggests ancient mystery until a backhoe taps stone and history leans in to take a look. Workers were digging the foundation for a building when they struck something solid. At first it looked like rubble, maybe a buried pillar or a forgotten wall. But it wasn't. It was smooth, too smooth, and massive. It was a sarcophagus, jet black, nearly 9 feet long, over 5 feet wide, sealed tight, no inscriptions, no carvings, no markings of any kind. Just a perfect, ominous rectangle, like a box built not for remembrance, but for forgetting. News spread fast. Social media exploded with speculation. Was it cursed? Was it the tomb of Alexander the Great? Was it something better left untouched? Everyone had theories. Very few had facts, but facts were on the way. A team of archaeologists arrived. They studied the site, measured the stone, analyzed the material black granite, dense and heavy, quarried hundreds of miles away. Transporting something like this in ancient times would have been an enormous effort. You don't build a box like this casually. You build it with intention, with purpose, with secrecy. And then the decision came, they would open it. Let's pause here and imagine that moment. You're standing by the edge of a coffin that hasn't been opened in 2,000 years. The lid alone weighs 15 tons. You don't know what's inside. A king, a curse, a story the world isn't ready to hear. The team lifts the lid, and for a moment, just a second, there's nothing but silence. Then the smell hits, thick, metallic, rotten, like rusted water, and old blood, and something that's been trapped too long in the dark. Inside, the sarcophagus isn't filled with treasure. It isn't empty either. It's full of reddish-brown liquid. Brackish water seeped in over centuries through a crack in the seal. Floating in the liquid are bones, 3 skeletons, 2 men, 1 woman, waterlogged, decomposed, tangled together like they were thrown in. This wasn't a royal burial. It was a mass grave. And immediately, the questions begin to swirl. Who were they? Why were they buried like this? Why in a sarcophagus that would have cost more than some entire temples? There were no amulets, no gold, no inscriptions to honor the dead. Just bone rot and silence. One skull had what looked like an arrow wound. Another was shattered in the back, the sign of blunt force trauma. The woman's remains were more degraded, but showed signs of compression, possibly crushed by the other bodies or by collapse during burial. This wasn't ceremony. This was disposal. But if that's true, why bury them in such an elaborate coffin? Theories bubbled up like the foul liquid inside the tomb. Some believed it had been reused, that the sarcophagus was built for someone important, maybe a general, maybe a noble, and then for reasons lost to time, never used as intended. Instead, it became a hiding place, a dumping ground. Others thought it was symbolic. A decoy, a distraction placed shallow in the earth to keep tomb raiders from digging deeper. If true, it raises a haunting question. What were they trying to protect? Still others wondered if the burial was an act of desperation. Alexandria has seen its share of chaos fires, floods, invasions. In a time of panic, maybe someone shoved 3 bodies into the most secure box they could find, sealed it fast, and ran. But the strangest part, the sarcophagus was sealed, tight. The water didn't pour in immediately. It crept over time through hairline fractures. Slow, intentional, almost patient, like something didn't want to be disturbed. Let's talk about the material. Black granite is rare in ancient Egyptian burials. It's hard to quarry, harder to carve. It's used sparingly, usually for statues of gods or high-level tombs. This sarcophagus, it was cut from a single block. The lid alone took engineering precision to shape and position, and yet it contained no names, not even a symbol, just blank, heavy silence. That blankness is unnerving, because in ancient Egypt, names were everything. Your name was your soul. To die without one was to vanish, to be denied entry into the afterlife. For 3 people to be buried in such an extravagant box and given no names, that's not an accident. It's a statement. DNA testing was done, isotope analysis, facial reconstructions, still no matches, no identities. They weren't royalty. They weren't famous, just lost. And here's the part that won't let archaeologists sleep. At night, the site was shallow, only 5 meters below the surface. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't buried in some sealed tomb. It was right there just under the street, like someone wanted it to be found or wanted it to be forgotten. Eventually, the sarcophagus was lifted from the ground, the bones removed, the liquid drained, the box placed in storage, not on display, not celebrated, stored, as if no one really knows what to do with it, as if it makes people uncomfortable. Today, you can find photos of it online, huge, imposing, empty. But what you can't find is closure, because there are no records, no stories, no reason why 3 broken bodies were sealed inside a king's coffin with nothing but decay. No reason why something that massive should feel so deliberately anonymous. So tonight, imagine standing beside it, your hand against the cool granite, the lid still slightly ajar, the air stale tinged with rust and time. And in the quiet, imagine it isn't just a coffin. It's a question, not one you answer, but one you carry. You're standing at the base of a pyramid, but not the kind you're thinking of. This one isn't in Egypt. It isn't surrounded by sand, but by green valleys and the soft haze of volcanic soil. The air smells like rain and stone. Welcome to Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born, an ancient city in central Mexico that once housed over 100,000 people and yet left behind no known written language, no record of who its rulers were, and no real explanation for why it was suddenly abandoned. It's not just a ruin, it's a riddle. And inside that riddle lies something small and unsettling. Not a temple, not a tomb, a mask, or more accurately, masks. They've been found in tunnels, in hidden chambers, stashed behind murals, or sealed in offerings deep below the Pyramid of the Sun and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, made of stone carved with obsessive detail, obsidian, jade, serpentine, turquoise inlay that still gleams under museum lights centuries later, and yet they all share one eerie trait. They have no mouths, just smooth, flat faces with empty eyes that seem to stare back at you. Some have tiny shell fragments pressed into the brow, like a third eye. Others are painted or marked with strange symbols. But none of them are smiling. None of them are speaking. It's like they were never meant to. Now here's the strange part. Most of these masks aren't wearable. They're too small, too heavy. The stone would break if strapped to a human face. Some don't even match human proportions. So if they weren't worn, what were they for? Let's rewind. Teotihuacan flourished between 100 BCE and 550 CE. Its builders constructed one of the most complex cities in the ancient world, complete with wide roads, apartment compounds, and some of the largest pyramids on Earth. They aligned everything with celestial patterns, solstices, equinoxes, even Venus cycles. This wasn't guesswork. This was mastery. But when it comes to the people themselves, we know almost nothing. Their written language, if they had one, is lost. The city was abandoned long before the Aztecs arrived, and yet these masks remain tucked into the deepest parts of the temples, often buried alongside other offerings. Claws, rubber balls, mirrors, statues. And once, an entire pool of liquid mercury. Yes, mercury. Still shimmering, still toxic, still waiting in the dark. You start to get the sense that these masks weren't for people at all. They were for something else. One mask in particular haunts researchers. It's carved from green serpentine stone. Its eyes are sharp, almond-shaped, inlaid with turquoise. Where the mouth should be nothing, just unbroken stone. And at the center of the forehead, a tiny curved shell fragment, almost like a third eye. Sound familiar? And this is where it gets even more curious. The mask was found buried beneath layers of crushed obsidian under the temple of the feathered serpent. Not alone. Nearby, archaeologists uncovered a partial skeleton, just the skull and hands arranged with eerie precision. And in the hands, a feather, still intact, still whole, still feathering across the bones like it had only just been placed. Now that shouldn't be possible. Organic matter doesn't survive that long in Mesoamerican soil. It decays, disintegrates, disappears. But this feather remained. Some say the environmental conditions created a perfect preservation bubble. Others whisper that it was preserved through ritual, intent. And this mask, the one they called the listener, was found only inches away. Let's talk about that name. The listener, not the speaker. Because that's the whole idea, isn't it? These masks weren't made to talk. They weren't built to express. They were made to observe, to record, to remember, like a face worn by the gods when they needed to watch. And then there's the theory that none of these masks were symbolic at all, that they were literal keys, matching carvings and secret doors trigger mechanisms hidden deep within the temples. And there is some evidence. In 2011, archaeologists exploring a sealed tunnel beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent discovered a vast underground chamber. They sent in a robot with a camera, tiny wheels crunching against ancient dust. What it revealed shocked everyone. Hundreds of artifacts, miniature pyramids, jade figurines, balls of rubber, stacks of masks placed carefully as if arranged by invisible hands. It wasn't a burial chamber. It was a vault, a ceremonial storage space meant to preserve something we can't quite define. Some believe the people of Teotihuacan believed in a form of cosmic rebirth, that the city itself was a kind of machine, and the masks were the gears, each one assigned to a particular soul, or a moment, or a function in the afterlife. And the masks, when buried, weren't forgotten. They were seated, planted like memories in the soil of the gods. But then the city fell silent, abandoned, burned from within. Some say there was civil unrest. Some say famine. Some believe the priesthood turned on itself. We don't know. And maybe we're not supposed to. Because every time we dig a little deeper, we don't find answers. We find eyes, unblinking, carved, waiting. And maybe that's what unnerves us most. These faces we can't wear. These expressions we can't read. These mouths that never speak but somehow whisper everything anyway. So tonight, imagine walking through a tunnel beneath an ancient pyramid. Your flashlight flickers against the walls. Obsidian shards crunch under your boots. And then, in the half-dark, you see it. A face resting in the dirt, too still, too knowing. Its turquoise eyes catch the light. Its smooth, silent mouth offers no greeting. And for a moment, you get the feeling it's not just something you found. It found you. The ground crunches underfoot, not from gravel or leaves, but from crystals, salt. It coats the rocks. It clings to the walls. It stings your nose and your lips. You're deep inside a mine in northwestern Iran, and the air is dry in a way that makes your bones feel older just from standing here. This is Cherabad in Zanjan province. It doesn't look like much, just a long abandoned salt mine beneath the desert hills. Quiet, bleached, forgotten. Until one day in the 1990s, a miner hit something unexpected. Not ore, not rock. A face, bearded, frozen, and unmistakably human. His skin was still there. So was his hair, long matted, tangled into itself, like time had tried to pull it back but failed. His boot still clung to his foot. His tunic, worn thin by the years, remained intact across his shoulders, but he wasn't sleeping. He'd been dead for over 1,500 years, and he wasn't alone. Over the next several years, archaeologists unearthed more bodies, 6 in total. Maybe more still, buried deeper in the mine's labyrinth of collapsed tunnels. They call them the Salt Men now, although they weren't all men. And they weren't buried by choice. They were preserved by accident. The salt, as it turns out, is one of the best natural preservatives on Earth. It draws out moisture, halts bacterial decay, and slows the soft rot of time to a crawl. The bodies inside Cherabad didn't mummify in the Egyptian sense, no embalming, no ceremonial wrapping. They simply paused. Perfectly. Each body tells a story. One man still had a knife tucked into his belt. Another had a bag slung across his chest, the strap stiff from centuries underground. One wore a single earring, still glinting faintly in the torchlight. Some were curled, as if caught mid-crawl, trying to escape a collapse. One skull shows signs of trauma, blunt force, like a falling rock or beam struck him down in an instant. Another man's remains were found face down, arms stretched as though reaching for something just beyond his grasp. But here's where it gets eerie. Their hair is still soft. Their eyelashes are still in place. Their stomachs, in some cases, still contain remnants of their last meal seeds, dried herbs, bits of grain. One of them had intestinal parasites, offering modern scientists an unexpected window into the ancient human gut. You want to look away. You don't, because these weren't kings or generals. They weren't famous. They were workers, miners, ordinary people doing a hard job under the earth, and then suddenly becoming history themselves. And not just history, messengers, preserved so well that their clothing still folds when touched. Their tools still function. Their boots still bend. Imagine that someone dies in a mine 2,000 years ago, and today you can still see the stitching in his belt. That kind of preservation changes the rules. It breaks the quiet contract we make with time that the past will eventually fade, soften, vanish. These men didn't. They stayed. Even their DNA remains intact. Recent analysis revealed something even stranger. One of the Salt Men didn't match the genetic profile of the others. His markers suggested origins far from Iran, possibly from the Caucasus or even further. Was he a traveler? A slave? A migrant worker? Why was he in that mine? We don't know. But the salt remembers. Their tools vary too. Some carried picks, blades, ropes. One had a spoon, carved from horn. Another had leather straps, carefully woven, tied in a pattern we still haven't seen elsewhere. These weren't clumsy miners scraping in the dark. They were skilled. They had technique. And when things went wrong, when the tunnel collapsed or the ceiling gave way, there was no rescue, only salt, only silence. Today, the salt men are stored in a museum in Zanjan. One of them is displayed behind glass, still curled in the position he died, his face contorted, not in fear, but in stillness. His beard is full, His nose flattened slightly. His eye sockets collapsed just a bit from pressure, but his presence is intact. He looks like he could open his eyes any second, and you feel just for a moment like you're interrupting something. What makes this story even more powerful is what's not there. There are no elaborate inscriptions, no golden amulets, no songs sung in their name. These people lived and died without the expectation of remembrance, and yet they were remembered anyway, because the earth decided not to let go. Salt did what kings and scribes could not. It preserved ordinary lives not out of reverence, but through chemistry. And in doing so, it gave us a rare, unscripted moment in ancient history. Not the moment of glory, the moment of work, of labor, of breath and sweat, and slipping boots and aching hands. The Salt Men weren't part of some great dynasty. They weren't entombed with plans of resurrection, but they came back anyway, in a way no one could have predicted. So tonight, as you settle into your bed, close your eyes and picture the walls of that mine. Not dark, not frightening, just still. Picture the miners swinging their picks, the creak of ropes, the soft crunch of salt underfoot, and then quiet. Not because no one speaks, but because time has slowed, because salt has whispered, "Not yet." It looks like a field at first, a broad plateau, wind-brushed and grass-covered, stretching across northern Laos. The kind of place you might drive past without thinking twice. No towering statues, no ruins, just earth and sky and silence. And then out of the mist they appear, jars, stone jars, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, scattered across the land in clusters, some in rows, some in haphazard spirals, some standing solitary like forgotten sentinels. They vary in size. Some are small enough to cradle in your arms. Others tower above you 6 feet tall, heavy as cars carved from solid sandstone and granite. No decorations, no inscriptions, just jars. They've been here for over 2,500 years. And for just as long, no one really knew what they were for. Local legend said giants used them to brew rice wine after great battles. Some believed they were rain collectors, storage containers, primitive distilleries. Archaeologists scratched their heads and cataloged their mysteries. Then someone found the bones. It happened at a quieter site, one of the lesser-known fields slightly overgrown and less studied than the others. The jars there looked the same, weathered, massive, enduring. But beneath one of them, buried shallow in the soil, were tiny fragments of bone, infant bones, delicate, brittle, arranged with care, and suddenly, everything changed. Excavations deepened. Beneath more jars, archaeologists began uncovering additional remains, small bones, sometimes burned, sometimes bundled in fragile fabric, sometimes placed within tiny ceramic vessels. Over and over the pattern repeated. These weren't brewing vats. They were graves, and not just any graves for infants. For babies, some less than a month old, some buried alone, others grouped in patterns that hint at ritual. A few were accompanied by beads, little carved tokens, fragments of cloth so fine they dissolved into near invisibility. One child was buried with a tiny bracelet, another with a smooth, polished stone tucked beside their head. This wasn't chaos. This was intention. The jars, it seems, weren't created to hold grain or water or alcohol. They were created to hold memory, grief, love. Imagine that for a moment. You're a mother in an ancient, unwritten culture. Your child dies suddenly, silently, as so many did in the harsh centuries before modern medicine. There are no cathedrals, no cemeteries, no books of condolence, but you carry them up the hill, to the jars, and you place their tiny form beneath the stone. You wrap them in cloth. You offer beads. You whisper something, maybe a prayer, maybe just their name, and the wind sings over the grass. What's even stranger is how many of the jars are empty. Not everyone contains remains. In fact, most don't. Only a small fraction of the jars have confirmed burials beneath them. Some believe this points to a multi-stage process bodies placed elsewhere to decompose, then transferred here for final rest. Others think it was selective. Maybe only infants. Maybe only certain lineages. Maybe something we'll never understand. And the jars themselves, they weren't easy to make. This isn't clay or adobe. These were carved from massive stone blocks, some weigh over 6 tons. They had to be quarried, sometimes miles away, transported, shaped, and placed. Why go to all that trouble for infants? Why build a necropolis on a plateau that offers no shelter, no water, no strategic value? Why, unless the purpose wasn't practical, but spiritual? Several of the jars have lids. Not all, just a few. Thick stone discs, perfectly sized to cap the vessels, like they were sealing something inside. Some lids are decorated. Some align with celestial patterns, the rising sun, at certain times of year, the setting of specific stars. It wasn't just about burial. It was about meaning. And here's where it gets more complicated. Most of the jar sites remain unexplored, not because of disinterest, but because of danger. The region is littered with unexploded ordnance remnants of war dropped decades ago and never cleared. Many jar fields remain untouched, too risky to examine, which means there could be hundreds, maybe thousands more burials beneath the soil waiting to be rediscovered. Waiting, but not forgotten, because the jars remain. Through rainfire, war, and time they stand. Moss-covered, cracked, tilted, but still watching. Some researchers have drawn parallels between the plain of jars and other megalithic traditions. Similar burial jars have been found in India, in Indonesia, even in the Philippines, always connected to ritual, always tied to infants or elite individuals. But nowhere is the scale like this. Nowhere do the jars stretch across the land like an open-air memory. And here's the most haunting part. When locals were asked about the jars, many of them, especially the elders, went quiet. Not out of fear, out of respect. They call this area a quiet zone. Animals avoid it. Birds don't sing as loudly. People tread softly here, as if the ground itself is sacred, as if the jars are listening. One elder, when asked why no one builds near the jars, simply said, "They're still full." Still full. Even the empty ones. Still full of something. Of presence. Of spirit. Of silence that doesn't feel empty, but heavy. The weight of tiny lives once lived. So tonight, as you lie under your blanket and listen to the world soften around you, picture that plateau. The breeze through tall grass. The slow hush of mist moving across the stones. And the jars. Each one a cradle, a tomb, a question. They hold no names, no stories. Just the outline of a memory sealed in stone and carried forward by wind and time. Maybe they weren't built to store bodies. Maybe they were built to hold sorrow. And maybe that's why they endure. Because sorrow, like stone, does not fade. It waits. There's a stretch of forest in northeastern Thailand where even the birds hesitate. The ground is uneven, overgrown with moss and twisted roots, and the sunlight barely cuts through the green canopy above. It's the kind of place that feels old, not just in years, but in memory. like it's carrying something it doesn't want to share. Tucked within this jungle, nearly swallowed by time and undergrowth, was once a humble monastery, not a grand temple. No towering statues, just a few beams, worn stones, a scattering of bricks. Nothing that screamed importance. Until the storm came, a heavy summer squall like so many before. It toppled a tree beside the old monastery. And beneath the roots, wrapped in soil and shadow, someone found a stone, flat, heavy, about the size of a pillow. It was smooth on one side, gently curved on the other. At first glance, it looked like just another fragment of old masonry. But when the mud was cleared, something strange came into focus. There were symbols carved into the surface. Not pictures, not letters. Symbols. Curved spirals intersecting lines. Hooks and dashes. They ran in long, tight spirals across the flat face of the stone. Not in rows like writing. Not in any language that anyone recognized. But precise. Intentional. And deeply unfamiliar. The villagers called it the Inkstone. And it earned the name not just for its shape, but for what was inside the carvings, blackness. The grooves were filled with a deep, dark substance. Not paint, not soot, not even ink technically. Under the microscope, it looked like carbon, but it had fused into the stone's grain as if it had been burned in without heat. As if the words, or whatever they were, had become the stone itself. Linguists were called in, historians, cryptographers, and all of them said the same thing. They had no idea what they were looking at. It wasn't Khmer, not Mon, not ancient Chinese, not Pali or Sanskrit or any known tribal script from the region. The symbols didn't repeat the way known writing systems do. There were no word breaks, no punctuation, no decipherable rhythm, but it felt like language. That's the unnerving part. You look at it, and something in your brain says, this means something, but your eyes don't know how to read it. It's like trying to dream in a language you've never heard and waking up certain you understood until you try to speak it aloud. Some of the carvings resemble waveforms. Others look like musical notation from a parallel dimension. A few researchers even suggested the entire inscription might be a kind of vibrational code meant to be understood not by sight, but by sound. Imagine that a written language designed to be heard. Now here's where it turns from strange to stranger. Shortly after being placed in a museum display in Bangkok, the Inkstone was removed. Quietly. Less than a month after its debut. The official reason, fragility. The unofficial reason, the ink began to change, not dramatically. Not with glowing lights or dramatic pulses, but gradually, quietly. It got darker, thicker. In photos taken just days apart, the black in the grooves seemed to deepen, as if responding to air or light, or simply being seen. Some said it was a trick of humidity. Others blamed oxidation. But the stone was placed in a climate-controlled environment. No other objects in the case were affected. And yet, the ink kept darkening, like it was waking up. Today, the stone is kept in a drawer, a real one, locked, temperature regulated, access by appointment only, no rubbings allowed, no photographs. Researchers wear gloves when handling it, and still, it watches. That's the only way to describe it. It doesn't have eyes, but when you hold it, you feel it pressing back. Not malevolently, not even intelligently, just patiently, like It's waiting for someone who can read it. Now let's entertain a few theories. One, the inkstone is the last remnant of a forgotten culture. A small, isolated group who developed their own form of symbolic language, possibly one based on sound or ritual movement. Their knowledge, lost through war or assimilation, lives on only in this one object. 2. The inkstone is a mnemonic device meant not to be read directly, but to trigger memory, like a map for the mind. In this version, the symbols don't convey direct language, but function like notes in a song or poses in a dance patterns designed to be remembered, not spoken. 3. The stone is not from here. Not in the extraterrestrial sense, though some fringe thinkers go there, but in the cultural sense. Perhaps it was brought from far away, a gift, a relic, a piece of something larger, a puzzle box without the box. And then there's theory 4, the quiet one. No one writes papers about, that the stone was meant to stay hidden, that its appearance wasn't an invitation to explore, but a warning not to, because language is power. And a language you don't understand, written in a script that burns itself into stone, might not be there for your benefit. It might be there to keep something in. So tonight, as your room dims and your eyes start to close, imagine walking through that forest. The hush of leaves overhead, the thick scent of moss and rain, and then beneath your foot, a shape in the soil. You kneel. You wipe away the earth. And there it is, flat, cool, waiting. You run your fingers across the spirals. You don't know the words, but you feel the rhythm, like a hum in your chest, like breath inside stone. And somewhere deep beneath your skin, something old stirs, not memory, recognition. High in the southern highlands of Peru, where the wind moves like a whisper over dry soil, and the sun hangs low in the sky, like a slow, burning eye, archaeologists uncovered something unexpected. Not a tomb, not a treasure, a shallow burial, 2 infant skulls side by side, and both of them wore masks, not just any masks. These were thin sheets of hammered gold, shaped perfectly to the contours of their faces, pressed gently over the eye sockets, curved at the bridge of the nose, smooth and bright even after over 1,000 years underground, delicate, fragile, intentional. It wasn't the gold that raised eyebrows. Burial masks were known across the Andean world symbols of status protection or spiritual transformation. But this was different. These weren't warriors. They weren't nobles. They weren't even children yet. They were babies, and not just babies, twins, identical skulls, same age, same bone structure, same cranial shape, elongated slightly in the back, the result of intentional modification during infancy. A common practice in the Andes, where reshaping the skull was part of cultural identity. But in this case, the shaping was identical, exact, as if done by the same hands, at the same time, with a singular purpose. The masks match too. Their surface patterns, hammering technique, and dimensions flawlessly mirrored, as if they weren't just made for twins, but made as twins. And that's where the mystery deepens, because nothing like this has ever been found. No written records, no oral traditions, no known ritual that speaks of infant twins being buried this way. Among the Inca Wari and Nazca cultures, no mention, no myth, no story. So the question rises like a chill on the back of your neck. Why? Why mask 2 babies in gold? Why treat them like royalty? And why bury them so quietly? The grave itself was modest. No walls, no temple, Just a trench lined with river stones in a windswept field no one had lived in for centuries. No elaborate offerings. Just the twins wrapped in cloth resting face to face. It felt more like a whisper than a monument. Let's talk about twins in ancient cultures. Across the world, they've been seen as both sacred and dangerous. In some Mesoamerican myths, twins were destined to change the world heroes who journeyed to the underworld, who tricked gods, who restored balance. In others, they were omens, warnings, harbingers of disruption. In Andean myth, silence, almost nothing, which is odd, because statistically, twins have always existed, and yet they're barely mentioned. Some scholars think this absence is itself meaningful, that twins were taboo, hidden, revered or feared in a way that prevented their stories from being told. So maybe this burial isn't just rare, maybe it was forbidden. Now, consider this: the skulls were placed nose to nose, not side by side like siblings, but facing each other, like mirrors, like balance. And between them, sealed beneath the soil, were traces of a powdery white substance, possibly ash, possibly crushed bone. Some say it was symbolic. Others think it was remains, perhaps, of a ritual offering, perhaps of a parent. No one knows for sure, but this much is clear. The burial was intentional. The symmetry, the skull shaping, the identical masks. This wasn't an accident. It was a statement. But a statement of what? Let's imagine for a moment that these twins weren't just children, that they were chosen, raised from birth, not to live, but to serve a purpose, a ritual, a spell. The gold masks may have been a kind of sealing, a way to preserve not just the body, but the role. In some cultures, gold was believed to hold the essence of the sun. It purified. It transformed. It wasn't currency. It was power. So to place gold over the faces of two infants, that wasn't decoration. It was declaration. A few fringe researchers have speculated that the twins were part of a mirror, offering a forgotten belief that balance between two identical beings could open a gateway, a passage between worlds, flesh and spirit, earth and sky. If true, the burial wasn't just symbolic, it was functional. But here's where it gets stranger. Tests on the gold revealed that it didn't come from local sources. It was mined over 700 miles away, in a region known for ceremonial artifacts, not everyday trade. That kind of distance meant effort, planning, ritualized intent. Whoever buried these children went to great lengths to do it this way, in this place, with this material, and then disappeared. Because after the twins were buried, the site was abandoned. No village returned. No further graves were dug. Even animals avoid it, according to locals. They call it a quiet place, not cursed, just still. And today, that stillness endures. The twins are housed in a museum vault now, not on display. Few researchers are allowed to study them. Some say it's due to conservation efforts. Others suggest something more superstitious, an unease that clings to the gold, the symmetry, the silence. One curator reportedly refused to work in the vault alone, not because of what the twins might do, but because of what they might mean. Because if this was a ritual, it's one we no longer understand. If this was a ceremony, it's one we no longer perform. And if this was a message, we've forgotten how to read it. Maybe that's why the masks have no mouths, not because the twins didn't speak, but because we've forgotten how to listen. So tonight, imagine the wind sliding over those Peruvian hills, the hush between two stones, the weight of gold pressing gently onto soft bone. And in that stillness, imagine two faces, identical, silent, looking at each other, and maybe, just maybe, still waiting for the world to remember what they were buried to preserve. The wind rolls in steady waves across the Eurasian steppe, quiet, dry, endless. You can almost hear the past moving through the grass, brushing against the edges of forgotten burial mounds, like an echo looking for someone to remember it. This is the land of horse lords, tattooed queens, and mummified warriors. A place where history gets buried in permafrost and preserved like parchment. And in one of these ancient burial sites, a modest grave revealed something small. Easy to miss, but impossible to forget. A needle, 7 centimeters long, carved from jade. You pause, because that's not normal. Jade isn't a common material for tools, especially not here. It doesn't come from this part of the world. The nearest known jade source lies over 500 miles away, across mountains, rivers, and terrain that doesn't lend itself to casual trade. And yet here, it is a perfectly balanced, polished jade needle resting beside a tattooed mummy in a burial that whispers of quiet power. The grave belonged to a woman, not a queen, not royalty, but someone special, someone who mattered. Her body had been wrapped in layers of wool and leather. The cold, dry soil had preserved her skin, and on that skin tattoos, spirals and lines and symbols that seemed to run along the meridians of the body like a map drawn in ink or energy. Some researchers believe the markings represented healing pathways. Others think they were decorative or ritualistic. But either way, they weren't random. They had flow, intention, rhythm. And right there in her hand was the jade needle, not tucked in a pouch, not hidden in a bundle of tools. Held, like she was still using it, but it wasn't worn the way most tools are. There were no signs of sharpening, no scratches, no blood residue, no thread. It hadn't sewn cloth or pierced leather. It had been carved not roughly, not utilitarian, but beautifully, lovingly, reverently. This was no needle for clothing. This was something else. Let's talk about jade. Across ancient cultures, from China to Mesoamerica, jade has always been sacred, not for its monetary value, but for what it represented. Life force, purity, balance. In some traditions, it was believed to be alive, to carry energy, to connect the physical body to the spirit world. So what does it mean when a woman is buried holding a needle made of jade? Let's rewind. Acupuncture as we know it didn't formally emerge in recorded Chinese medicine until millennia after this burial. But the principles behind it, energy meridians, pressure points, bodily balance, are much older, much more ancient. Some believe the roots of these ideas stretch back into the shadows of the steppe passed orally through shamans and healers who had no need for writing. Could this jade needle be a medical tool? It's possible, but if so, it wasn't for everyday use. This wasn't something you carry in a pouch and jab into someone's sore shoulder. This was ceremonial, symbolic, sacred. Maybe it wasn't about healing the living. Maybe it was about guiding the dead. Some believe the needle was a kind of key, a tool used in ritual to open the body to the spirit world, or perhaps to close it, to prepare a soul for passage, to ensure the energy flowed correctly into whatever came next. And if that's true, maybe the woman wasn't just a healer. Maybe she was a priestess, a guide, someone who worked with what couldn't be seen. And here's where it gets even more mysterious. There are no other jade tools like this from the region. None. No workshop remnants, no other graves with similar items. It's unique, which means someone went out of their way to find the jade, to carve it, to bury it, with her, and nothing else. No gold, no weapons, just her tattoos and the jade. Sometimes, the absence of other objects says more than their presence. This was the thing that mattered. Some researchers have suggested that the needle was meant to be buried as a kind of talisman, not to be used, but to be held. A conduit, a focus, an object that captured something energy, intention, soul, and carried it forward. And maybe that's what makes it haunting, because you can feel it even now, centuries later. The smoothness of the jade, the balance of it in your hand. Not heavy, not threatening, just focused, like it knows what it's for, and it's waiting. Let's pause for a moment. Picture that burial. The grass outside whispering, the sky wide and endless. Inside the tomb, the woman's body curled in rest, the tattoos still visible across her skin like lines of forgotten music. And in her hand, tight but not clenched, the needle. Still there, still speaking in a language no one remembers. Some say it was part of a healing tradition that predated acupuncture. That the needle was used not to puncture flesh, but to draw energy, to shift it, to balance it. Others believe the needle wasn't meant to touch the body at all, that it was for the spirit, that when someone was near death, the priestess would use the jade to guide the soul outward like parting a curtain. No one knows for sure, but here's something to think about. We spend a lot of time trying to make sense of the past. We categorize, classify, define. But some objects resist that. They don't want to be solved. They want to be felt. This needle, small, silent, sacred, is one of those. So tonight, close your eyes. Feel the weight of stillness and imagine a woman standing in the wind-swept grasses of the steppe, her arm inked with spirals, her hand closed gently around a needle carved from stone, older than memory. Not a weapon, not a tool, a bridge. And maybe, just maybe, the bridge still stands, waiting for someone to take the next step. It's always the teeth that stop you. You can see the rest of him clearly wrapped in tightly woven fibers, curled gently like he fell asleep sometime in the late afternoon of the 9th century. His bones are thin, but intact. His posture almost meditative, knees drawn up, arms crossed. The burial site is modest, a stone-lined chamber in a quiet valley of northern Peru. But the moment the cloth is peeled away from his face, the room falls silent, because all of his teeth, every single one, are black, not rotted, not missing, not decayed by time, polished, gleaming, pitch black from root to tip, as if someone painted each one with ink and then sealed it in with glass. This is the Valley Priest, as researchers later called him. His body was discovered in a highland burial site believed to belong to a little-known pre-Incan culture. We don't know what they called themselves. We don't know what language they spoke, but we know they had beliefs, strong ones, because someone somewhere decided that this man's teeth of all things needed to be changed before he crossed over into the next world. Let's talk about that. In most ancient cultures, mouths were sacred. They spoke prayers, called the gods, consumed offerings. In some traditions, they were believed to hold a person's breath, their essence, even their soul. So what happens when you deliberately alter a man's mouth? Not his lips, not his tongue, his teeth. It wasn't a disease. That was the first thing the forensic team ruled out. This wasn't staining from tobacco or food. It wasn't decay from trauma or illness. Under magnification, You could still see the enamel sheen. The black coating was deliberate, applied with care and precision. Even the backs of the molars were covered. Samples taken from the surface revealed something even more bizarre. The blackness was made of finely ground charcoal, mixed with a resin-like binder possibly derived from plants, and then applied so meticulously that it adhered down to the microscopic level. Hardened, polished, permanent. He didn't become this way after death. He went to the grave like this. And here's the strange part: we've seen body modifications before. Skull shaping, tooth filing, lip plugs, tattoos. But nothing quite like this. Nothing so intentional, so performed. Around his body were ceremonial items, feather bundles, dried herbs, obsidian blades. A circular disc of hammered gold rested on his chest, dulled by time but unmistakably sacred, and near his head a small bowl, still sealed. Inside, a powdery mixture of fine charcoal and a sticky resin, just like the one on his teeth. This wasn't a random burial. This was a ritual. And the teeth weren't a side effect. They were the point. Let's step into the ceremony. The chamber is lit with firelight. The priest sits upright, his followers chanting low around him. Someone stirs the bowl ashes and resin and dips a narrow tool into the mix. One by one, they coat his teeth, pressing the blackness deep into each crevice. Not painting, sealing. Then they polish, buff, shine. The mouth disappears into shadow even in light. A void where speech once lived. A darkness that reflects nothing. And when he finally closes his mouth, he becomes something else. Not just a man, a symbol. But of what? Some researchers believe the blackened teeth were meant to mark spiritual authority. A way of showing the priest had crossed some internal threshold. He no longer needed to speak, only to channel. Others think it was protective, that the mouth as the gateway to the soul needed to be sealed, purified. Charcoal is still used today in traditional medicine as a cleanser, a filter. Perhaps in their eyes, coating the teeth was a way to preserve the purity of his breath even after death. But a more chilling theory has taken root, that the blackened mouth wasn't for purification, it was for transformation. That in dim firelight, as the priest spoke to his people, his teeth shining black beneath the flicker of flame, he became something else, something other. Imagine it, a figure rising in the half-dark of a mountain shrine, his body wrapped in feathers, herbs burning chants, echoing off stone walls. And then he smiles, and all you see is void. Words emerging from a mouth that reflects no light, like hearing a voice from the abyss. Some say the ritual was meant to strip the man of identity, that in death he wasn't buried as himself, but as a vessel, a conduit between worlds. The black teeth weren't just aesthetic, they were functional, a mouth through which spirits might speak. It would explain the gold disc on his chest, a sun symbol, perhaps pressed to a man whose mouth had become night. And yet the silence around this practice is deafening. No other bodies from this culture have been found with the same treatment. No carvings depict it, no murals, no myths. Just one man, one mouth, one black gleaming smile. That's what lingers. He's on display now in a museum in Peru. His body sealed in glass, his face dimly lit. Visitors walk past him every day, their reflections briefly caught in the sheen of his teeth. Some look away, others stare too long, because there's something unnerving about a smile that offers no warmth, something haunting about a ritual no one remembers, and something deeply fascinating about a people who believed the most sacred thing they could do to a man before he left this world was to make his voice disappear into the dark. So tonight, as your room fades to shadow and the world around you grows, still imagine the quiet hum of a ceremonial cave, the burn of herbs, the rustle of feathers, the final breath of a priest as someone leans forward with a bowl of black powder and whispers, "Open your mouth." Sometimes a skeleton speaks by what's missing, not what's worn or weathered, not the tools it held or the things it carried into the next world, but by what was deliberately disturbingly not there. This is the story of a warrior king whose grave was unlike any other. It begins in the low hills of modern-day Slovakia, where archaeologists were surveying a site from the early Iron Age. They had found the usual pottery shards, fire pits, fragments of bone. Then came a deeper chamber, sealed more carefully than the others layered in dirt that hadn't been disturbed in centuries. When they opened it, they knew right away it was something special. The body inside was laid flat, arms crossed over the chest. His armor iron and bronze still covered his torso, engraved with patterns of lines and symbols no one could quite identify. A sword lay along one arm, dulled by time, but still impressive. A chipped bronze shield sat beside his left hand. Two wooden sandals, worn and warped, clung stubbornly to the bones of his feet, everything in its place, except for one thing. There was no spine. None. From the base of the skull down to the pelvis, the entire vertebral column was absent. Not crumbled, not decayed, not displaced by time or animals or geological shifting. Gone. Cleanly, intentionally, even stranger. The armor chest plate back, guard shoulder clasps was still sealed. Intact, not tampered with, not cut open and resealed, which left the team with a grim and impossible question. How do you remove a man's spine without disturbing his armor? Let's sit with that for a second, because the more you consider it, the stranger it becomes. The armor fit closely. There were no slashes, no repairs, no signs of tampering. To remove the spine without disturbing it would require an almost surgical precision, something far beyond what we associate with Iron Age technology. It wasn't just missing, it had been taken, and not recently. The soil around the grave had settled naturally. There were no signs of intrusion, no indicators of grave robbery. Whatever happened, happened at the time of burial, so the spine wasn't stolen. It was never meant to be there. The skull itself was broad and regal. A simple gold circlet had fused around the cranium, too plain to be decorative, too deliberate not to be symbolic. His limbs were long and powerful. His arms showed signs of use calluses in the bone from years of combat or labor. But his ribs, his pelvis, the anchor points for his spine, undisturbed, clean as a diagram. It didn't make sense. And then someone noticed something else. Buried beside the warrior was a small wooden box about the size of a hand. It had been sealed with resin, preserved by luck and dryness. When opened, it revealed a single bone, not human, a bird bone. From a raptor, likely a hawk or falcon, and carved into it lines, symbols, not letters, not runes, just tight spiraling marks that looped around the shaft of the bone and disappeared into the tip, as if the bone itself was pointing at something no one could see. And that wasn't all. At the foot of the grave was a flat circular stone about the size of a dinner plate. It too bore a carving 12 lines spiraling from a central dot radiating outward in perfect symmetry. 12 segments, just like the average number of thoracic vertebrae in a human spine. But the center, empty, missing, just like the man. Some researchers believe this burial was symbolic, that the spine was removed to represent sacrifice, that this man had given something more than his life. Maybe it was a gesture of humility, maybe a binding, maybe an attempt to keep something from returning. Others are less certain. One theory suggests the spine had been replaced in death with a material that later degraded wood or bone or something we haven't yet considered. Maybe it wasn't a burial at all. Maybe it was a transformation. Because here's another wrinkle. Local legends long dismissed as folklore tell of a line of kings who ruled with serpent backs, men who could bend without breaking, who moved like shadows and spoke with the voices of birds. Their bones were said to whisper, their deaths incomplete. Could this warrior have been one of them? Could the missing spine be part of something larger? A rite, a belief, a fear. A few fringe researchers even suggested the man had undergone a procedure, not after death, but before. A replacement spine, a structure that didn't survive, something mechanical. Organic theories spiral out as they always do. But the facts remain. A warrior king, a full suit of armor untouched, a spine gone, a falcon's bone carved with forgotten lines, and a stone diagram that ends with a void. Some have called it a burial of silence, a statement that what was removed wasn't meant to be found, that the spine, the core of the body, was never meant to return to the earth. And perhaps neither was he, because despite the rich grave goods, despite the careful placement, no inscription bears his name. No symbol tells his story. No carving says what he was or what he became. So tonight, picture a hillside in ancient Europe, a chamber beneath the grass, a warrior resting in silence armor, still gleaming faintly in the dark. His head turned west toward the setting sun, his spine absent, his mouth closed, and beneath his fingers, a single falcon's bone, not to carry a message, but to be one, a whisper in the dark, a line erased from the body, a reminder that even in death, some kings stand taller than we're prepared to understand. If you didn't know where to look, you'd miss it. Just outside Jerusalem, in the dusty hills of the Hinnom Valley, sits a cluster of ancient burial caves, unmarked, quiet, carved into the rock and worn by centuries of sun and footsteps. They don't announce themselves like pyramids or temples. They hum softly, like something waiting to be heard. In 1979, a small team of archaeologists began excavating one of those caves near a place called Ketef Hinnom. It was part of a standard survey, a routine look at Iron Age burials, bones, pottery, a few faded inscriptions. They expected modest finds, a few footnotes in a report. What they found instead were 2 tiny silver scrolls, each one no bigger than a cigarette. Delicate, tightly rolled, tucked beside a shattered skull in the corner of the tomb, as if someone had placed them there in secret with trembling hands. At first, no one could read them. The silver was thin, fragile, like a whisper pressed into metal. Any attempt to unroll them risked destruction, so they waited. For weeks, then years, until finally, with the help of advanced imaging and scanning technology, the scrolls were unrolled, and what they revealed shocked the world. Not a king's command, not a map, not a curse, a blessing. Specifically this one: may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Sound familiar? It should. It's the priestly blessing still spoken in Jewish and Christian traditions today. A sacred phrase from the book of Numbers in the Hebrew Bible. And here it was scratched into soft silver more than 2,600 years ago, older than the Dead Sea Scrolls, older than any known biblical manuscript, not written on papyrus or parchment, not copied in a scribe's room, etched by hand, folded, carried, buried, a prayer forged in metal. Let's stop there, because it's one thing to read scripture in a book. It's another to hold it in your palm, etched by someone who didn't know whether the world would remember. Someone who wasn't writing for scholars. They were writing for protection. You see, these scrolls weren't scrolls in the way we usually imagine. They weren't meant to be read and reread. They were amulets worn around the neck or buried with the dead. The words weren't for the living. They were for whatever came next. A shield of words, a soft metal anchor in a hard, uncertain world. The letters were painstakingly etched line by line, the spacing careful, the script ancient but legible. The kind of work you don't do in a hurry. The kind of work you do with your breath held, because the name of God was on it, not just Lord, but the sacred tetragrammaton, YHWH, the ineffable name, the one that Jewish tradition holds as too holy to be spoken aloud. And here it was carved into silver more than 600 years before the Common Era. It was a revelation. For historians, it proved something remarkable, that parts of the Hebrew Bible, long thought to have been written down much later, were already in circulation, already considered sacred far earlier than anyone expected. For believers, it was something more. Proof that ancient prayers don't fade, that the words people whispered in the dark, during exile, during fear, during loss, still carry across time. But there's something deeply human about it too. Because the scrolls weren't grand, they weren't golden, they weren't buried with kings or priests. They were found in a modest tomb, a common person's resting place, someone who lived and died without fanfare, someone who hoped the words would follow them. That's what gets you, not the archaeology, the hope, because these weren't written with the expectation of being discovered. They were written to disappear, to go with someone into the ground, to protect, to bless, to guard in case. And yet, they didn't disappear. They waited for 2,600 years, through war, through empire, through fire and exile and silence, until someone opened a tomb and found them still coiled, still quiet, still sacred. Let's talk about what that means. We think of history as being made by big events, conquests, revolutions, declarations. But sometimes it's made by something small, a hand, a stylus, a sliver of silver, a prayer. There are no names on the scrolls, no author's signature, no date, just the blessing, just the hope that someone or something was listening. And that's what makes them powerful, because while empires rose and fell, while kings named themselves gods and cities burned to ash, these scrolls lay in the dark and waited, not for glory, for remembrance. And they got it. Today, they're displayed behind glass, not in a vault, not in a private collection, but in the public eye. People lean in faces close to the protective case, trying to read the ancient Hebrew letters with their modern eyes, and maybe if they're lucky, with their hearts. So tonight, as your room softens around you and the noise of the day falls away, picture that cave in Jerusalem. Dry, cold, still, a skull in the corner, a scroll beside it, small, coiled, a message not to the world, but to whatever waits beyond it. May the Lord bless you and keep you. And maybe, just maybe, that prayer wasn't just for the one who wore it. Maybe it's for you too, right now. In the dark, the hills near ancient Jericho don't say much. They rise and fall with the softness of worn fabric, their slopes brushed by desert winds and the occasional bleat of goats. You'd walk past this spot 100 times and think nothing of it. No ruins jutting from the earth, no shattered walls or sun-bleached bones. Just a flat patch of stone, man-made but forgotten, sitting quietly beneath the dust. It was during a small regional survey, nothing major, just a modest dig in a lesser-known sector, that the team found it. Not a structure, not a tomb, just a level platform, perfectly cut into the rock. About the size of a modern living room. Smooth, barren, lonely. At first, they assumed it was a foundation, maybe for a long-lost temple or a guard post. But there were no walls, no stairs, no doors. Nothing that indicated something had once stood there. Just stone, and a single detail that changed everything. Right in the center of the platform, flush with the surface, was a nail, or rather a spike, 4 inches long, tapered to a fine point, embedded so cleanly into the rock that it seemed to defy the tools of its time. And it wasn't rusted iron or tarnished bronze. It was gold, not gilded, not alloyed, solid hammered gold, too soft to be used for construction, too valuable to be driven into stone without purpose. But there it was, placed like a punctuation mark at the center of something no one understood. Let's pause. Imagine the effort it takes to hammer gold into solid rock. Even today, it would require specialized tools, careful preparation. Now imagine doing that 8,000 years ago, before the invention of the wheel, before writing, before most cities had even been imagined. And then imagine walking away without leaving a single inscription, a single word to explain why. Carbon dating of nearby soil suggested the platform itself was pre-pottery Neolithic, over 8,000 years old. But the gold spike, it couldn't be that old. The techniques needed to mine, smelt, and shape gold didn't appear in this region until thousands of years later. So either the platform and the spike were created at vastly different times, or someone knew something they weren't supposed to know. The team scanned the surrounding area with ground-penetrating radar, hoping to find context. A building, a chamber, a tomb. Instead, they found a void, roughly 6 meters below the platform, perfectly aligned with the spike, was a narrow vertical cavity, too small to be a room, too precise to be natural. Just a hollow pocket of space deep in the rock. They wanted to dig, but the platform was fragile. The spike was embedded. And then there was the other issue. During transit to a secure lab, the gold spike was briefly lost. Not stolen, not misfiled, just gone. The crate arrived empty, sealed, no tampering, no damage. 3 weeks later, the spike reappeared. Not in the lab, but in a local post office, delivered anonymously in a box filled with black sand and a single typed note. Do not move it again. No fingerprints, no return address. The spike was intact, embedded in resin, and since then, it hasn't moved. It now sits in a museum vault, not on display, stored upright in its original position. No one's tried to extract it again. Some say it's superstition. Others say it's respect, because no one really knows what it's for. Some theories say it's symbolic, an anchor, perhaps. A way to mark sacred ground. In Mesopotamia, we know ceremonial nails made of bronze or copper were driven into temple thresholds, symbolic fastenings between heaven and earth. Could this spike have served a similar purpose? But if so, Why gold? And why, in Jericho of all places, a city older than most creation myths, a place of walls and war and whispered ruin, there's an old legend barely remembered that speaks of a mouthless gate, a door that must never be opened. Not sealed with bricks or stone, but fastened with gold, the nail of the mouthless gate, they called it. A story dismissed by scholars categorized under regional folklore. The kind of tale passed from grandmother to child and then forgotten by history. But when the story was reread alongside this discovery, something shifted. Because maybe it wasn't a metaphor. Maybe someone long ago believed the platform was holding something in. Not physically, spiritually. The spike wasn't a marker. It was a lock. And here's the detail that stays with you. The tip of the spike, just 2 millimeters, was worn, not chipped, not broken, polished, as if something had touched it, repeatedly, or from below. Some believe the void beneath the platform is nothing, a natural gap, an air pocket. Others believe it's waiting to be opened. The excavation has since been sealed off, the platform reinforced. There are no tours, no signs. You can walk within a few hundred feet of it and never know what lies beneath your shoes. But it's there. The gold still gleams, untarnished, smooth. Not part of history's grand architecture, but something older, deeper. A key, a seal, a warning. We don't know. We're not supposed to. So tonight, as the noise of your day fades to hush and the world grows dim around the edges, picture a flat stone platform beneath the stars. No writing, no sound, just a single golden spike hammered into the earth by hands that left no other trace. No prayers, no monuments, just silence, and the quiet promise that some things were never meant to be removed. In the far north of Scandinavia, where the lakes stay frozen for months and the sky stretches wider than your imagination can hold, there is a body of water with no name. Not officially, at least. Locals call it different things. Ghost water, the drowned hollow, the lake that watches. But those names don't appear on any map. The lake lies deep within protected wilderness, where pine forests huddle tightly and silence has weight. No one expected to find anything there. It was just a site for environmental sampling, soil tests, pollen records, sediment cores, routine work for a university research team. But then the core sample caught something solid. They pulled it up expecting rock. But it wasn't. It was a human skull, perfectly intact, clean, pulled from several feet of lakebed silt like it had only recently been placed there. Then another, and another. By the end of the week, they had pulled over 24 skulls from a crescent-shaped section of the lakebed. Some were facing inward, some tilted sideways as if caught mid-conversation. No long bones, no torsos, no remains of clothing or boats, just skulls, and they weren't randomly scattered. They formed a boat, not a literal one. No wood, no metal, no carved prow, but a shape, a vessel, an outline of something sacred, symbolic, or utterly terrifying. Dozens of skulls arranged in a deliberate arc-hollow eyes gazing upward or turned toward each other as though whispering across time. Smaller bones, phalanges, vertebrae fragments were arranged along the outer edges like ribs on a hull. It looked like something someone built, not out of timber, out of memory. Let's breathe there for a moment, because the water above them had been still for centuries. And beneath it, this creation rested in absolute silence, untouched by fish or decay, as if the lake itself had been preserving the arrangement, protecting it, or guarding it. Initial dating of the bones produced strange results. Some skulls were over 3,000 years old, others closer to 800. Different time periods, different lives, but the same resting place, the same shape. It wasn't a single event, it was a tradition, something done not once, but repeatedly over more than 2,000 years. One skull had clear signs of violence, a deep fracture to the parietal bone, possibly caused by a blunt weapon. Another showed carefully drilled holes near the temple's ritual trepanation, or some unknown preparation. A few of the skulls had been partially polished, their surface gleaming faintly even under lake water murk. What was this? An offering? A warning? A vessel for the dead? Theories came fast, as they always do. One suggested that this was a form of ancestor worship, placing skulls into a sacred pattern to honor the dead and guide them across the afterlife. Like the Vikings' funeral ships, but made entirely of bone. The skull boat wasn't meant to float on water. It was meant to sail elsewhere. Another theory was darker, that this was a burial for the shamed. Those who couldn't be honored in traditional ways. Exiles, traitors, people whose bones were deliberately separated from their bodies and arranged into something other. But that theory doesn't explain the care. Because this wasn't haphazard, it was art. One researcher, after weeks at the site, simply wrote, "This is not disposal. This is devotion." The bones were arranged too precisely, the spacing too consistent. Some skulls were even aligned with the rising sun at the summer solstice. That's not an accident. That's design. And the boat, it was beautiful, not in the usual sense, but in the way tragedy can be beautiful. In the way something so strange, so quiet, makes you feel a deep pull behind the chest. A kind of ache that doesn't come from sadness, but from not understanding something you know was important. Then there's the matter of the paddle. Yes, a paddle, found a few feet from the edge of the bone arc embedded in the silt. Wooden, rotted nearly beyond recognition, but unmistakably carved with a grip and a blade. One paddle, no boat, unless the bones were the boat, and someone had launched it. The surrounding area holds no clues, no settlements, no temples, no other burials, just trees, stones, wind. The site was never built upon. No one lived there. It was only visited, over centuries, to bring more skulls. You can feel it in your bones just thinking about it. The hike through snow-dusted forest. The skull wrapped in linen held like a child. The hush as you arrive at the water's edge. And then the soft ripple as the lake accepts another face into its reflection. Some say the skull boat was a guide. Some say it was a warning. But the lake, it says nothing. Even now, the site has been closed off. Not for secrecy, but for respect. The skulls have been reburied in the pattern they were found. No museum exhibits. No tourism. Just silence. Some places are better that way. And tonight, as your room falls quiet, and the rhythm of your breath softens into the dark picture, that northern lake under starlight, still, cold, unmoving, and beneath the surface, resting just beyond reach, a boat made of faces, their eyes turned skyward, their story untold, but somehow understood. You're in the Amazon now. Not the part with boat tours and wildlife documentaries, the deep Amazon where the canopy swallows light and sound alike. The air is thick, damp, and humming with life. Mosquitoes float like dust. Vines curl like fingers. Everything feels alive and watching. It was supposed to be a biodiversity study, A team of university researchers was mapping vegetation and soil levels in an area hundreds of kilometers from the nearest known settlement. No signs of agriculture, no ruins, no reason to expect human presence, ancient or modern. Then someone found a figurine, just a few inches tall, baked from red clay. At first, it looked like a child's toy, awkwardly shaped, maybe broken. But as the dirt came off, its features sharpened. It had enormous eyes, too big for its face, almond-shaped, bulging, slightly, almost insect-like. No mouth, just a smooth stretch of clay where a mouth should be. Arms were thin and short, no fingers, legs tapering into nothing, and in its chest, scratched, not molded, were symbols. Marks, maybe tattoos, maybe writing. It didn't match anything known from Amazonian archaeology. Then they found another, and another. Over the course of a week, they uncovered nearly 40 of these strange figurines, all within a small circular area of riverbank. Some were buried in pairs, others arranged in tight groups, always with those same wide, staring eyes. Some with scratches, some holding miniature objects. One had a snake coiled around its shoulders, its tiny clay tongue flicked forward. And yet, no other signs of settlement. No pottery shards, no food remains, no tools, no graves, no charcoal. Just figurines, as if someone had carried them deep into the forest and left them there. Not abandoned, placed carefully, intentionally. The circular arrangement hinted at a kind of ritual, a gathering, maybe even a performance, though the audience or the purpose is lost. Carbon dating of the clay places them at roughly 2,000 years old. They were fired in primitive ovens enough to make them durable, but not decorative. Their surfaces are crude, their limbs abstract, but the eyes always precise, always watching. Researchers were baffled. The closest artistic comparisons come not from the Amazon, but from Mesopotamia, specifically the Ubaid culture, which also produced figurines with massive eyes and expressionless faces. But the Ubaid people lived half a world away. There's no known connection, no trade routes, no overlap. So how do two cultures separated by oceans, languages, and millennia produce such similar figures? Coincidence or something deeper? Some anthropologists suggested the figures were fertility idols, but none of them appear pregnant. None emphasize reproductive features. Others speculated they were guardians, spirit effigies meant to protect the area or mark a sacred space. But if that's true, sacred to who? Because according to local oral traditions, no tribe claims this land. Not now, not ever. Even today, the area is avoided. Elders from nearby communities describe it only as the place with the silent watchers. They remember stories passed down from generations, tales of a people who left no footprints, who moved without sound, and who never looked away. When asked why no one lives there, an old woman reportedly whispered, "Because they already do." So let's talk about those eyes. In most human art, eyes are windows, symbols of knowledge, of emotion, of soul. But these, they don't look into. They don't reflect. They don't blink. They watch. One figurine had 3 eyes, 2 normal, and 1 placed vertically in the center of the forehead. Another had what looked like antennae rising from the skull like insect feelers. A third had a hollow back filled with tiny stones that rattled softly when shaken. Maybe a rattle, maybe a message. The problem is, without a culture to connect them to the figurines, don't fit anywhere. They're an island of mystery in a sea of silence. Even stranger, despite annual monsoon flooding, the figurines were in remarkable condition, not scattered by water, not eroded, as if the land itself had protected them. Some researchers believe they were buried deliberately during the flood season timed, so the water would pass over them, cleanse them, anoint them, before retreating and revealing them again. If that's true, then the site wasn't a permanent settlement. It was a ceremonial drop point, a sacred deposit, a ritual only a few knew how to perform, and then they stopped. No one knows why. One theory suggests the makers were nomadic and eventually assimilated into neighboring tribes. Another posits that they simply died out, a sickness, a war, or maybe something quieter, a slow fading like embers vanishing into ash. But maybe they chose to disappear, to leave only these eyes behind as a message or a warning. Today, only one of the figurines is on display. The rest are sealed in museum storage, not because they're fragile, but because, according to one curator, people kept having nightmares. Not from looking at them, from being looked at. That's the thing. These figurines don't feel passive. They don't sit. They witness, and maybe that was the point all along. So, tonight, as the dark folds gently around you and your room softens into silence, imagine the Amazon, not the busy parts, the deep parts where no one walks, where even the birds fall quiet, where the mist hangs heavy and the roots twist like old hands. And somewhere in that quiet beneath a thin layer of earth, a clay face waits. Its mouth is smooth, but its eyes never closed. The first thing they saw was gold, a glint beneath the soil where it shouldn't have been. It was a grave one of hundreds tucked beneath the soil near the Black Sea, outside what is now Varna, Bulgaria. Nothing unusual at first. This was a burial ground after all. But when the archaeologists began brushing away the layers of time, they found something that stopped them cold. A figurine, small, delicate, hammered from pure gold, humanoid in shape, but abstract, almost stylized. It had no facial features, no mouth, just a head-shaped oval above a torso that curled slightly at the waist, like it had once been bent in movement or maybe agony. But the figurine wasn't whole. It was shattered, snapped at the waist. The arms twisted. The base melted just enough to suggest it had been briefly exposed to intense heat. And here's the part that makes your stomach tighten. It had been placed atop a small bed of human teeth. Not a skull, not a jawbone, just teeth, neatly arranged in a semicircle. No roots, no enamel damage, no explanation. Let's breathe with that image for a moment. A broken idol, laid to rest on a foundation of teeth and then buried. Not in a royal tomb, not in a ceremonial chamber, but in an unmarked, unadorned grave with no bones, no body, just that. What were they trying to say or silence? This wasn't the only grave at the Varna necropolis that raised eyebrows. Far from it. The entire site is one of the richest prehistoric cemeteries ever discovered. Dated to around 4500 BCE, it predates the pyramids of Egypt by more than 1,000 years. Inside these graves were gold artifacts, over 3,000 of them. Necklaces, armbands, diadems, decorative plates. Some bodies were buried in full regalia. Others had no gold at all. One grave was filled with treasure, but no person, just objects, arranged as though someone invisible had been laid to rest. But grave 43, the one with the shattered idol, was different. No other artifacts, no offerings, no body, just gold. And teeth. What does that even mean? Let's start with the figurine itself. It doesn't match the Venus statues, common in European Neolithic culture, those exaggerated feminine forms associated with fertility and goddess worship. This one was lean, almost androgynous, abstract, and deliberately broken. This wasn't a damaged relic. It was destroyed on purpose. Why? Was it an execution, a punishment for a symbol, a severing of power? Across cultures, breaking a figure can serve as a spiritual act, a way of neutralizing its energy, severing its influence, or ending its connection to a ritual. And what about the teeth? Teeth are intimate, durable, the last part of us to decompose. They hold age, ancestry, even disease, but they're also unsettling. Collected teeth arranged without the rest of the skull are rare in prehistoric burials. In some ancient traditions, teeth were believed to house memory. To bury them was to seal knowledge. To bury them beneath an idol, that could be worship or containment. Here's where the theories fracture. Some believe the idol was a guardian spirit shattered to end its watch. The teeth were offerings perhaps from followers or from those who had benefited from its protection. A final tribute before burial. Others suggest something darker. That the idol represented a power no longer welcome. That it was broken in fear. The teeth, a warning. A ward. Pieces of the people it had touched laid below it so it could never rise again. There's also a theory that the entire site was a ritual battleground, not of war, but of belief. A transition point between the old gods and the new. The figurine may have been a sacred object from a fading religion. Its burial violent isolated was the final nail in its spiritual coffin. The gold in this case wasn't about wealth. It was about weight. In many early belief systems, gold wasn't just valuable, it was divine. It didn't tarnish. It reflected the sun. It lived forever. So imagine breaking a gold idol. That's not a simple act. That's blasphemy or liberation. The problem is, we don't know. We don't have texts. The Varna culture left no writing, no scrolls, no stone-carved edicts, just graves, just gold, just absences where names should be. And this one grave, this one figurine, it refuses to explain itself. Some archaeologists called it a burial of erasure, a deliberate attempt to remove something from memory. Not by hiding it, but by making it unsettling. By destroying its face, stripping its context, and surrounding it with teeth instead of words. A memory unspoken is harder to pass down, but it's also harder to forget. And that's the tension. Because when you bury something like that, deep enough part of you wants it to stay hidden, but part of you wonders if someone might dig it up again one day and ask the very question you were trying not to answer. What did this mean? What were you so afraid of? Tonight, as the lights dim and the quiet of your room settles into place, imagine that figurine, not as treasure, but as testimony. A broken figure of a forgotten god, resting in the dark on a bed of silence. Teeth like a smile with no face, gold that shines even when you don't want it to. And somewhere beneath the soil of time, a voice that never spoke, but still whispers. In the Zagros Mountains of western Iran, where ancient wind scours stone and silence lingers like dust, there's a mound archaeologists once thought was unremarkable. Another tepe, just one of many scattered across the Near East. They expected pottery shards, maybe some burial goods. Nothing more than the everyday story of early farmers and forgotten hearths. But what they found in Tepe Zagros wasn't ordinary. It was hot, not in temperature, In origin, they found bones, human bones, but not just dry and sun-bleached like you'd expect. Not the familiar white of archaeological remains. These bones shimmered. Some looked blackened like obsidian. Others had a glossy surface, smooth and glassy. A few had warped, melted not in flames, but in a way that suggested something deeper. Stranger, vitrification, a process in which material is transformed into a glass-like substance through exposure to intense concentrated heat, usually over 1,000 degrees Celsius. The kind of heat you'd expect in a modern kiln, a volcanic eruption, or a nuclear event, not in a Neolithic burial site over 6,000 years old. The bones weren't burned, they were fused. No charred wood, no ash, no surrounding soil disturbance to suggest an ancient fire. Nothing had been torched, nothing had burned around them. And yet, they glistened like glass. What could do that? The team thought maybe minerals had seeped into the bones, but tests ruled that out. The chemical structure of the bones themselves had changed internally without any signs of external exposure. They had been transformed, but without the presence of any known agent that could cause such a reaction. There were no kilns, no furnaces, no signs of smelting, just bones in the dirt and heat that shouldn't exist. That's when the questions started. What kind of heat can transform bone into glass without affecting the surrounding earth? What kind of force does that and leaves no trace of itself? What kind of burial requires it? Let's step back. This wasn't a mass grave. It wasn't a battlefield. It was a settlement, an early agricultural community with grinding stones, hearths, simple housing. People who lived quiet lives. People who planted and harvested and buried their dead with modest care. But in one layer, in one trench, were the vitrified bones, and in another, deeper layer, older by centuries more. It had happened more than once. A pattern, but not a pattern anyone could explain. One complete skeleton found curled in the fetal position had ribs that had collapsed inward and fused. The skull had fractures, but not like from blunt force. These fractures were smooth, curved, like heat stress. One femur had hollowed and glazed over, like the bone had boiled from within, and yet the burial site around it was undisturbed. The tools, the pottery, the soil itself showed no sign of fire. Some archaeologists proposed natural gas explosions, methane pockets perhaps ignited underground. But the geology of the site didn't support that. No fissures, no gas channels, no burn pattern. So, what was it? Could it have been ritual? Some ancient practice involving heat that we've never seen before? It's not impossible. In some ancient cultures, fire was sacred not just for warmth or cooking, but for transformation. The body wasn't just buried, it was prepared, altered, burned, yes, but this wasn't fire. This was something else, something focused, controlled, and terrifying. Let's imagine a burial rite no longer remembered, a process whispered from generation to generation until it became secret, a fire that doesn't burn but transforms, a heat so precise, so intense it fuses the body from the inside out, and it doesn't touch the soil, only the bones, only the person. Why? Some say it was a form of preservation, like mummification, but stranger, sealing the body, preventing decay, keeping something in or out. Others suggest the opposite, that it was meant to destroy the body completely, not through disintegration, but through transformation. That vitrifying the bones was a way of erasing the physical vessel while preserving its essence. Glass doesn't rot, it shatters, it reflects, it traps. And that's where the theories start to spiral. A few fringe voices, researchers working at the edge of accepted theory, have proposed that the vitrification wasn't ritual at all. It was weaponry, not from this time, not from this earth. That some force, some event occurred in this region long ago capable of producing this kind of heat. A beam, a pulse, a moment. Something burned from above or within, flash heating the bones while leaving the world around them untouched. That sounds like science fiction, but so does vitrified bone with no source of heat. There's no consensus, only wonder and unease. The site has since been sealed. The most fragile samples are stored in controlled labs, but not much progress has been made. No one's willing to excavate deeper for fear of damaging the unknown or waking it. And maybe that's wise, because some things aren't meant to be understood right away. Some things require time and silence. So tonight, as the stillness wraps around you, like warm linen, close your eyes and picture that lonely hillside in Iran. The wind slow and patient, the stones half buried, and beneath them, bones that shine in the dark, bones that whisper not of death, but of change, bones that were touched by something we no longer have a name for, and maybe never did. Beneath the stone temples and Neolithic chambers of ancient Malta, down winding staircases carved by hand before the pyramids were even imagined, there is a room where your voice doesn't just echo, it vibrates. The Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni is one of the oldest known underground temples in the world. A labyrinth of chambers dug into limestone over 5,000 years ago. It served as a burial site, a sanctuary, a secret. Most of what it held is now gone. Bones moved, artifacts removed time, always doing what it does best. But one thing remains, a room they call the Oracle Chamber. And it does something very, very strange. Speak at the right pitch inside this chamber, about 110 hertz, just low enough to rumble in your chest, and the sound doesn't bounce. It lives. It rolls through the entire temple, like smoke curling into every chamber, humming through the stone. It doesn't matter where you are inside. The moment someone speaks into the chamber at that pitch, you feel it everywhere. In your arms, your ribs, your teeth. It's like the stone is breathing. This isn't an accident. The builders of the Hypogeum carved this room with acoustics in mind. The curves, the ceiling height, the density of the limestone, all of it engineered to do something we barely understand. But why? No texts remain. No carvings explain it. No inscriptions tell us how the Oracle Chamber was used. But the resonance that survived. Some researchers believe it was used in ritual chanting, perhaps to enter altered states. The hum of a voice shaking through the stone could easily trigger trance hallucination or even a kind of shared experience among those present. Imagine that. You're kneeling in the dark. Torches flicker. Someone begins to chant, low and slow. And suddenly, the stone itself joins in. Your bones tremble. Your mind swims. The air thickens with sound, not just heard, but felt. Not music, a mechanism. And that raises an unsettling thought. This wasn't a place built for sound. It was built with sound, as if resonance wasn't a side effect of the structure. It was the purpose. Let's lean into that, because sound has power. Not metaphorically, physically. Frequencies can move objects, break glass, shape sand. Modern researchers have demonstrated how certain tones can create standing waves, patterns in matter formed by nothing but vibration. Could the people of ancient Malta have known this? Could they have built a chamber that used sound not for worship, but for control? Some speculate that the Oracle Chamber could have been used to manipulate consciousness, that priests or shamans knew how to speak into the walls and shape the minds of those who listen, not through language, through frequency. There are reports from modern visitors, people who've stood in the chamber and spoken aloud, describing nausea, dizziness, visions. Is it suggestion or design? Let's go further. In the same temple system, red ochre spirals are painted on the ceilings, swirling, endless. No one knows what they mean, but combined with the resonance, they feel less decorative, more functional, like instructions or triggers. And it isn't just one room. Multiple chambers respond to sound in different ways. Some amplify, some mute, some distort. One narrow hallway near the oracle chamber creates a pulsing effect, like your voice is being pushed in and out of itself. What were they doing here? Who were they trying to reach? And why does it feel like they were listening more than speaking? Here's a detail that never makes the headlines. When archaeologists cleared the deeper chambers of the hypogum, they found dozens of tiny figures. Not statues, not idols, listeners. Carved humanoids with exaggerated ears. No mouths, just wide open ears, always placed near walls, like they were meant to hear something, and maybe still are. Some fringe researchers believe the hypogum was a kind of transmitter, that it channeled not just sound, but information. That those who entered the chamber entered not a temple, but a device. It sounds strange until you stand in it and your voice starts to vanish into stone. The government now limits access to the hypogum. Only a few visitors allowed each day. No loud speech, no chanting, no prolonged stays in the oracle chamber. Preservation is the official reason, but some say it's because the resonance is too intense, too unpredictable, too awake. So tonight, as the quiet of your room settles over you and your breath slows, picture this: a stone chamber beneath the earth, carved before history had language, walls that hum when you speak, ceilings that echo with ancient whispers, and in the center your voice low, your words gone, but the sound still moving, through the walls, through the bones, through time itself, because sometimes the past doesn't need to shout. It just needs you to listen. Sometimes, when you find a thing, you don't realize at first what it is. You just know that something isn't right. It's too symmetrical, too smooth. It doesn't belong. And yet, it does because it was buried. Because someone long ago took the time to place it exactly where you'd eventually find it. That's how the three-eyed figure was discovered. Not in a tomb, not in a temple, not even on display, but deep in the recesses of Malta's hypogum, beyond the chambers open to the public. In a sealed-off section where artifacts had been stored undisturbed for decades. Someone opened a crate expecting pottery. Instead, they found a figurine no one had cataloged. One no one remembered. It was small, humanoid, abstract, and it had 3 eyes, 2 carved where you'd expect, but the third centered on the forehead. Smooth, deliberate, not a crack or flaw in eye, just like the other 2, just like something was supposed to see through it. Its arms were folded across its chest. The surface was worn but not weathered, protected by time, not destroyed by it. No inscriptions, no known origin, no cultural match. Just stone carved by someone with a steady hand and a purpose no one now remembers. It didn't fit, and that's why it mattered. You've seen humanoid statues before. Most ancient cultures had them. Fertility goddesses with wide hips, hunting gods with strong shoulders, childlike offerings with comical features. But this, it didn't look human. It didn't look divine. It looked like a placeholder, a reminder of what no one knows. Some experts tried to dismiss it as symbolic. The third eye represents spiritual vision, they said. It's metaphorical. But there's a problem. Malta's hypogam predates most known uses of the third eye as a spiritual symbol. It's older than Hindu texts, older than Buddhist references, older than the Vedic tradition, where the concept is first clearly defined. If it's a symbol, it's a very early one, or it came from a completely different tradition, one that never made it into written history, one that left only this. Let's pause for a moment. The hypogam is a place built by people who carved stone like it was memory, who aligned their walls with the sun and the moon, who tuned their rooms to echo with human voices and perhaps something more. They didn't waste effort. They didn't carve things for fun. If they made a three-eyed figure and placed it deep underground, buried not displayed, that was a choice. So what were they hiding or preserving, or maybe waiting for? Some believe the figure was part of a lost belief system, an ancient cult of perception, that the third eye wasn't about seeing the spiritual, but the hidden, the patterns beneath reality, the sound inside silence. And maybe that's why the figure wasn't shown to the living, because it wasn't meant for them. Here's something else. Among the other figurines found in Malta's ancient temples are the so-called fat ladies, rounded, faceless, abstract, seated, reclining, sometimes headless. They dominate the display cases in museums, sparking debates about gender, divinity, and symbolism. But none of them have three eyes, only this one. Some researchers suggest it was used in ritual, that it was activated by sound light or presence. Placed in the hypogam's resonant chambers, it may have served as a focal point, a conduit for altered states of consciousness. Not worshipped, experienced. Others go further. They say the figure represents not a god, but a visitor. Something seen during trance, during dreaming, during something deeper. There are stories, quiet ones from oral traditions scattered across the world about people who came from the earth itself. Not spirits, not demons, not gods, just watchers, beings who observed without interfering, who taught in whispers, who vanished when we stopped listening. What if this figure is one of them? Not imagined, remembered? Let's entertain something strange. Imagine you are a priest or priestess in ancient Malta. Your community lives by the stars. You mark time by the moon and tide. You descend into the earth, not to escape death, but to touch something greater. You chant, you hum, you light your fires. And in that resonance you see a figure, silent, with three eyes. You don't worship it. You don't fear it. You remember it. And so you carve it, not to display, but to keep. So you never forget what you saw when the stone began to sing. That figure now sits in a drawer, not a tomb, not a pedestal. A climate-controlled storage drawer in a museum archive, rarely opened, rarely discussed. Most visitors don't know it exists. Most guides won't mention it. It's not censored. It's not suppressed. It's just ignored, but it's still there. Its three eyes still open, still watching. So tonight in the quiet space between thoughts, picture this: a stone room beneath the earth, a carved figure sitting alone in the dark, not waiting for worship, just witnessing. Its third eye fixed not on the world, but on the question you've never known how to ask. And maybe that's all it was meant to do, to remind you that not every answer comes through light. Some arrive through stillness. And stone, under the shadow of the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, buried beneath layers of obsidian and centuries of silence, a pair of hands held something impossible. A feather, not fossilized, not petrified, A real feather, soft, fragile, intact. Found clenched between two skeletal palms in a burial chamber no one had opened for over 1,000 years. Feathers, as you probably know, don't survive well, especially not in Mesoamerican soil, which is warm, wet, and biologically active. Organic material breaks down quickly. Textiles vanish. Hair disappears. Skin, even bone, can degrade. But this feather, it endured. That's the part that makes your breath catch, because this wasn't buried in some dry desert cave. This was beneath the earth of Teotihuacan, the ancient city whose true name we don't even know. The place where gods were believed to be born and where secrets still lie, buried in tunnels we haven't dared to open fully. The feather was found alongside a green serpentine mask. Small, beautiful, mouthless. Turquoise eyes that reflect light in a way that makes you pause, makes you lean in. It wasn't attached to a face. It was buried on its own, not worn, placed. And then there were the hands, just the hands. No arms, no torso, no skull. Two hands, arranged in a deliberate posture. One open, one closed. The feather resting between them, like a message, or a prayer, or a warning. Let's talk about that for a moment, because Teotihuacan was a city of rituals. You can see it in the pyramids, the murals, the alignment of streets with celestial cycles. Everything in the city feels choreographed, measured, controlled. Nothing was placed by accident. So what does it mean when a feather is buried perfectly preserved between two hands in a sealed chamber beneath a god's temple? Some believe it was an offering, a tribute to Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent deity, a symbol of flight wisdom divinity. In this view, the feather is a kind of signature, a sacred punctuation mark on a ritual no longer remembered. But feathers don't survive for 1,000 years by chance. Not here, not like this. That has led others to suggest the preservation wasn't natural. It was engineered, perhaps through chemicals, resins, or oils used to preserve delicate objects. But no trace of such substances was found. No sign that the feather had been treated. It wasn't wrapped. It wasn't sealed in a container. It was simply there. Some archaeologists proposed the environment in the chamber had created a microclimate, a bubble of dry, cool, and stable air that protected the feather from decay. But that raises a chilling question. Did the people who buried it know? Did they understand how to preserve something this delicate for this long? Or was the act itself not about preservation at all? Was it about timing? As if the feather wasn't meant to last forever, but just long enough to be found. Let's get even stranger. The skeleton's hands showed signs of intentional amputation. The cuts were clean, surgical, not the result of violence or accident. These hands weren't hacked off. They were offered. In some Mesoamerican traditions, hands held power. They were symbols of action, of creation, of sacrifice. In murals at Teotihuacan, you'll sometimes see floating hands, disembodied, reaching, releasing. Not severed in horror, separated with purpose. So maybe these hands weren't taken. Maybe they were given to hold a feather. One researcher called it a ritual transmission, a symbolic gesture in which the feather represented knowledge or spirit, and the hands were the conduit, the passage, the final transfer between worlds. It sounds poetic until you remember the feather is still here, and we don't know why. One hypothesis links it to the tunnel beneath the temple of the feathered serpent, a sealed passage discovered in the early 2000s. Robots sent into the tunnel found something astonishing: small orbs of gold-colored pyrite pools of liquid mercury miniature pyramids, and ceremonial masks. And beneath it all, silence. The tunnel's end remains closed. Some believe it leads to a ritual chamber. Others think it was never meant to be reached again. But the burial with the feather was found nearby, as if it was part of that system. A marker, a lock, a final offering before the door was sealed. We don't know. But the image lingers. A feather, 2 hands, a god above, a tunnel below. You can almost feel the ceremony in your bones. Picture it, night, torches flickering, the scent of copal resin in the air. A priest holds the feather aloft, bright shimmering, impossibly light. A second figure kneels, arms outstretched. The feather is passed. The hands receive it. The tunnel is closed, and then time passes, 1,000 years of it. The city crumbles. The name is forgotten. The gods fall silent. But the feather, still there, waiting. And when we found it, when we opened that chamber and saw the impossible softness of it still resting in stone, we didn't get answers. We got a question. Why did this survive? Why did it matter? Why does it feel like it's still holding something? So tonight, as your eyelids grow heavy and the hum of the world slips into hush, picture a temple buried in darkness. And deep beneath it, 2 hands cupped gently around a feather so light it barely touches them. Not floating, not flying, just waiting for someone who remembers how to listen. There's a jar, just one of many, that hums when the wind moves right, not audibly, not like music, more like a vibration in your chest or a strange tingle at the back of your neck. It sits on the edge of a high plateau in northern Laos, surrounded by dozens of others, all carved from stone, all older than most cities. But this jar is different, because when archaeologists lifted it carefully, slowly, like they were afraid of waking something, they found a burial beneath it. That wasn't surprising. They'd found infant bones under other jars before, fragile, pale remnants of lives barely begun, laid to rest in earth and sorrow. But this time, something else waited beneath the soil, a layer of ash and a sound. When the soil was removed and the chamber cleared, a strange resonance lingered in the air. Echoes lasted longer. Footsteps sounded muted, then sharp, like they didn't know what space they were in. One researcher clapped once and felt the air vibrate back at them just for a moment. It wasn't supernatural, not exactly, but it wasn't normal either. And the jar itself, it rang, not like metal, not like glass, but when struck gently with a gloved knuckle, it gave off a low, hollow tone, almost musical, almost sad. And then, as if that weren't enough, they found the stone disc that had once sealed the jar. Flat, circular, fitted perfectly to its base. It had a groove along the edge and tiny notches in a repeating pattern. One researcher compared them to tuning marks. Another more cautiously said they looked like notation, but no one knew what it meant. Let's step back. The Plain of Jars is still one of archaeology's quietest mysteries. Over 2,000 stone vessels are scattered across the hills of Laos, most between 2,000 and 3,000 years old. Some sit alone. Others form rough clusters. Few are decorated. Most are unmarked. And for decades, their purpose was debated, until someone started finding the bones. Most were infant or child remains. Some burned, some wrapped in cloth, or placed in ceramic jars inside the stone ones. These were burials, not storage containers, not wine vats, not rain collectors. And that changed everything, because building one jar, carving it from a massive boulder, transporting it miles across uneven terrain, takes time. Dozens of people, days, maybe weeks of labor. So who were these children? These babies that earned such effort? And what were these jars really for? Let's return to that resonant one. The soil beneath it had compressed differently. When core samples were taken, they revealed a layer of ash, then sand, then soil, arranged not by nature, but by design. Almost like an acoustic chamber. One archaeologist suggested it functioned like a resonating burial, a structure that wasn't just a tomb, but a sound device, a place where the wind or footsteps or even mourning cries might echo intentionally around the buried child, to sing them to sleep or to call them back. The ash complicates things further. Was it from a fire, a cremation, a ceremonial offering? It didn't match the pattern of a simple burn. The bones weren't scorched. The jar wasn't blackened. The ash was clean, pale, placed like a final layer of silence. In other cultures, ash is used to purify, to protect, to seal a moment. Could that be what happened here? And if so, why did the jar hum? Sound has always been more than noise. In many ancient traditions, it was a tool, a way to reach the spirit world, to awaken memory, to guide the dead. Drums, chants, horns. Even silence itself had structure. Maybe the jar wasn't just a grave. Maybe it was an instrument, a lullaby made of stone. And here's the strangest part, that jar wasn't alone. A few others, spread across the plain, also exhibited odd acoustics. Some echoed back differently, depending on where you stood. Others had strange wear patterns around the rims, as if something had once been tied there. Bells, chimes, rattles. One jar had faint carvings almost invisible, a spiral and a dot, meaning unclear. But the patterns are beginning to emerge. Sound, ash, infant bones, perfect placement, sealed lids, ritual, not scattered acts of grief. A system, a practice, a way of saying goodbye, or perhaps of saying something else entirely. And then there's the legend, one of the oldest in the region. It speaks of stone jars left by a vanished people, used to contain not wine, not grain, but echoes. The voices of the young preserved in silence, sealed for the sky to carry. Echoes, you feel it in your skin. So tonight, let yourself drift to that plateau. The wind is light. The grass sways softly. The jar is there gray-pitted. With time, its lid cracked just slightly. You reach out. You touch it. And in that moment, it hums, low, gentle, a sound without language. And somewhere below, beneath ash and time and memory, a child sleeps. Not forgotten, just still. You walk through a museum, past polished exhibits and carefully lit displays. And then you see it, a face, not a painting, not a person, a mask. It's carved from green serpentine, a stone so smooth it almost seems soft. The face it forms is symmetrical and serene, with almond-shaped eyes inlaid with turquoise eyebrows arched in quiet knowing. But where the mouth should be, nothing, just stone. Flat, featureless, silent. It stares back at you as if it's always known you'd be there. This is one of the masks of Teotihuacan, the ancient city in central Mexico, whose people built pyramids without leaving behind their name. Their art is everywhere, but their voice vanished. And these masks, scattered through temples, tunnels, and tombs, are among their most haunting legacies, because they weren't made to be worn. They're too small, too heavy, too brittle. Some have no straps or holes, and yet they're shaped like faces, not decorations, not adornments, imitations of something, of someone. And some archaeologists now believe these masks weren't for the living at all. They were for the gods. or for the dead, or for something else entirely. Let's look closer. The green serpentine mask you're staring at wasn't found in a tomb. It was found beneath a temple, buried deliberately with offerings of obsidian-carved figurines and rubber balls, as if it had been laid to rest in a place of honor. But honor for whom? There was no skeleton, no face that matched the mask. And then there's the eye. Not the two staring straight ahead. The third one, right in the middle of the forehead. A shell fragment, smooth and curved, set like a gemstone. It's not common. Only one or two masks show it. But when they do, the air around them seems to shift just a little, like they're trying to remember a dream you haven't had yet. Some say the third eye is a symbol of insight of vision beyond the physical. But in Teotihuacan, that symbol didn't exist elsewhere. So what does it mean here? One theory suggests these masks were ritual keys, that they were matched to chambers we haven't yet found, or to doors we've already walked past without realizing. Another theory posits that they were avatars, masks made not to cover a face, but to become one, carved not for human features, but for the spirits or visitors who never had mouths to begin with. Because here's the thing, none of the masks have mouths, not a single one. Eyes, yes, detailed, expressive, alert, but the mouth, gone, or maybe never there. Were these beings mute, or were they beyond speech? A few fringe researchers, careful to whisper their theories, suggest the masks weren't meant to look like humans. They were meant to look like memories of humans, faint impressions, echoes, like trying to sculpt a dream after waking up. And that raises another question. Why bury them? Why tuck them beneath the earth, beneath temples, beneath layers of crushed obsidian? Because obsidian isn't just stone, it's a mirror that shows you not what you are, but what you fear or hope you might become. And some of these masks were found lying atop slabs of obsidian face down, as if they were meant to reflect something inward, not outward. Maybe these weren't masks at all. Maybe they were vessels. Imagine a mask carved to hold identity, not to cover a face, but to contain it, to preserve it, to pass it on. A vessel for memory, for soul, for story. It sounds poetic until you stand in front of one and realize it's not just poetic. It's watching you. And that third eye, still open, still waiting. Let's return to the mask with the shell inlay, the one that stares just a little too long. It was found beneath the temple of the feathered serpent, along with skeletal remains, fragmented, scattered, but placed with purpose. One set of bones lacked a skull entirely. Another had two right hands, one holding a single feather. None of it makes sense. Not yet. But that mask, it was placed at the heart of it all, as if it knew, as if it witnessed something. And maybe that's what it was for. Not to speak, but to remember. That's what mouths do communicate. But these masks, they're silent. They don't tell. They don't warn. They don't explain. They endure. Because memory doesn't always need language. Sometimes it just needs a face. So tonight, as your room darkens and the outside world drifts further away, imagine one of those masks resting beneath the soil. Its eyes, closed for centuries, blink open, not to look at the stars, but to look back at us, at you. Because some faces were never meant to be worn, only found. Some things are broken on purpose, not shattered by time or accident, not worn down by weather or forgotten in soil, but broken with ceremony, with intent. Like a final sentence in a language we can't read anymore. That's what makes the idol from Grave 43 at Varna so unsettling. It wasn't dropped, it was ended. You already know the Varna Necropolis, a field of graves near the Black Sea, where over 3,000 gold artifacts were unearthed in the 1970s. It's the earliest evidence of goldsmithing in Europe and one of the oldest organized cemeteries in the world. The burials range from opulent to humble, and together they speak of a society that valued status, ritual, and legacy. But in grave 43 there was no body, no bronze tools, no beaded necklaces, no remains. Just an idol made of solid gold, broken. Its legs twisted, arms snapped, its surface warped by brief exposure to heat enough to melt the edges, not enough to destroy the form. It was still recognizable, still humanoid, still watching. But here's what stays with you. Beneath the shattered figurine was a fan of teeth, human teeth, unattached to any jaw, arranged in a semicircle like a smile without a face. They were not from the same individual, different sizes, different stages of development, a mix of ages, a collection, and no one knows why. Let's rewind. Most of the graves at Varna tell stories of wealth and symbolism. Elaborate golden ornaments buried with elite males, scepters, diadems, decorative plates shaped like sun rays or horns. These were people of power buried like kings, some with no bones at all, just gold and human shape. But grave 43 was different. No opulence, no identity, just the idol. And the teeth, some archaeologists believe the figurine once stood whole, worshipped, feared, or venerated, that it was shattered in an act of ritual violence. Not just decommissioned, neutralized. In some cultures, breaking an idol is a way to strip it of power, to sever its connection to the divine, to declare you no longer speak for us. In others, it's the opposite, a way to activate it, to make it sacred through destruction, to give it new purpose through fragmentation. Because sometimes, something must be broken to become holy. So which was it? A burial of disgrace or one of transcendence? And then there's the matter of the teeth. Why teeth? Why only teeth? They last longer than bone. They carry age. They carry identity. And across countless cultures, they've been used in rituals, worn, buried, displayed, even fed to the flames. Teeth are memory in mineral form. And these weren't randomly scattered. They were placed neatly, carefully, a foundation of enamel beneath a broken god. That's not coincidence. That's theology. Some believe the teeth belonged to followers, worshippers, who offered parts of themselves in sacrifice. Not death, just permanence. A piece of the body that says, I was here. I believed. Others suggest something darker, that the teeth were taken, pulled, a form of punishment or purging, that the idol was broken to contain or banish something, and the teeth were relics, evidence of what it had once touched. A warning, maybe, or an exorcism. But here's what we know. The grave was sealed, undisturbed. The soil around it had hardened like concrete, denser than expected, almost as if it had been tamped down from above. And nearby, nothing. No similar burials. No matching idols. No precedent. Just this one place, this one message, this one fracture in time. And maybe the most important part, no writing, no explanation. Because when you break something on purpose, the meaning isn't always in what you say. It's in the silence afterward. Grave 43 isn't just an archaeological anomaly. It's a confrontation. Someone thousands of years ago made a gold idol. Then they broke it. Then they buried it in teeth. And then they walked away. We found it. We measured it. We mapped its position. We categorized the teeth. But we don't understand it. Not really, because it wasn't meant for us. And that's the point. So tonight, imagine a grave by the sea. Not deep. Not grand. just a hollow in the earth dug with steady hands, a circle of teeth, a broken figure, a layer of silence, and then dirt, and then time, and then you looking down at something that never wanted to be found, and realizing it's still smiling. The bones didn't crumble like they usually do. They didn't flake under the brush or fade under the lights. When the archaeologists uncovered them at Tepe Zagros, a dusty mound tucked into the folds of the Iranian highlands, they shone, not polished, not preserved, vitrified. That's a word that doesn't come up much in archaeology. You hear it in volcanology, in ceramics, in disaster zones. It means to turn something, usually something fragile, into glass, to heat it so intensely that it stops being what it was and becomes something new, something smooth, hardened, transformed. But these were bones, human bones, and they had been turned into something that should not exist. The rib cages curled inward like they had been flash melted, skulls fractured with smooth breaks, not shattered by trauma, but warped by heat. One femur had split and folded in on itself, the marrow fused into a single shining ridge. And yet, there were no signs of fire, no soot, no charcoal, no blackened walls or scorched tools, just these glass-like bones resting quietly in a burial trench that was by every other standard completely normal. Let's take a breath. You're standing at the edge of the excavation. The wind smells like dust and sage. The soil crunches softly beneath your boots. Everything about the dig says this was a peaceful site, an early farming village with homes made of clay, simple tools, a community that likely lived hard but familiar lives. But in this trench, the rules stopped. There were several skeletons, all vitrified, all isolated to a single layer. Not one, not scattered. A cluster, a moment. The team's first thought was lightning, a freak strike that could explain sudden extreme heat. But there were no signs, no blast patterns, no magnetic anomalies in the surrounding soil. And it didn't explain the depth. These weren't surface remains. They were buried and still fused. Next theory, volcanic activity. But the Zagros Mountains aren't volcanic. Not now. Not in recorded prehistory. No lava tubes. No ash deposits. No minerals in the soil to suggest thermal trauma. Then came the strangest suggestion of all. Maybe the heat didn't come from outside. Maybe it came from within. One bone sample showed internal microfractures, consistent with pressure-driven heat, something pushing outward, not inward. Like the body had been heated from its core. Not a slow burn, a pulse. That's when people stopped talking, or at least stopped writing things down in the official reports. Because when heat appears without fuel, when glass forms without fire, when a human body fuses like ceramic in a kiln that no one can find, the story leaves science and enters something else. The older burial layer beneath the vitrified trench showed similar signs, though more subtle. Bones that were discolored, unusually smooth. A few that flaked like porcelain. Again, no fire. No structure that could have caused it. Just quiet transformation. Some began calling them the burned sleepers, but they didn't burn. They changed. A few researchers began to wonder, what if this was intentional? What if this wasn't destruction, but ritual? There are no written records, no carvings, no idols. Just pottery stone tools, woven fabrics that had mostly turned to dust, and bones that shine under the sun like glass left in a fire. In some ancient cultures, heat was purification, cremation, ascension. But cremation leaves ash. It leaves carbon. Vitrification doesn't. It leaves beauty and a lingering question. Could these people have known how to do this? If so, how and why? Some believed they had stumbled onto a natural phenomenon, an accidental process that left behind a few impossible bodies. But others whispered something stranger, that these were not accidents. They were messages, that the vitrified remains weren't victims, but participants, volunteers, or perhaps more accurately, vessels, because vitrified bone isn't just hard. It's resonant, like glass. It hums. Tap it lightly, and it sings. Imagine a burial not meant to preserve the flesh, but to preserve the sound, the echo of a person sealed in bone, transformed not to be remembered, but to be heard. No one will say it out loud. But the question hovers in the air like heat itself. Was something released, or was something sealed? The remains are now locked in secure labs, too fragile to test further, too strange to forget. No museum exhibit, no press releases, just a few photos, a handful of obscure reports, and the uneasy feeling that sometimes history doesn't decay. Sometimes it crystallizes. So tonight, close your eyes and picture the Zagros Mountains at twilight. The sun dipping behind ridgelines carved by ancient wind. The burial mound quiet and nondescript. And beneath it, bones that gleam. Not from gold, not from oil, from heat, from change, and maybe just maybe from something that was never meant to cool. You wouldn't know it was there unless you were looking for it. And even then, you might walk right past just another northern valley tucked between soft hills and slow rivers in Peru. The wind here moves like breath, low and constant. The soil is rich, but the people are gone. What's left behind doesn't shout. It stares. That's how they found it, a shallow grave beneath a patch of earth, no different from the rest. 2 infant skulls, side by side, perfectly preserved, fragile but undisturbed, and on each tiny face, a mask, not cloth, not wood, not clay, gold, thin sheets of it shaped to fit the contours of a baby's skull. Smooth around the eye sockets, pressed at the temples. No decoration, no symbols. Just blank, radiant masks, one for each twin. Yes, they were twins. The skulls were nearly identical, same size, same structure, same age. Likely less than 6 months old. Buried face to face. Not stacked, not aligned, but placed as if they were looking at each other, forever. No bodies accompanied them. No adults. No grave goods besides the masks. And no known cultural explanation. Let's pause there. Because in ancient Peru, burial was often elaborate. The Inca, the Mochi, the Nazca, these cultures wrapped their dead in layers of textile and meaning. Graves were filled with offerings, weapons, tools, charms. But this, 2 infants, 2 gold masks, nothing else. Gold was sacred, not for its value, but for its symbolism. It was the flesh of the sun, the breath of gods. It wasn't used casually. And yet here, 2 golden faces were buried in the earth like whispers, careful, reverent, and terrifying in their silence. Why would you do this? Why gild the faces of children and leave no words behind? Some believe it was an honor, that the twins were divine, or destined for something, or born during an eclipse, or a celestial event we no longer track. That the masks weren't about hiding, they were about protecting, shielding tiny souls as they crossed into the next world. But others suggest something darker, that the twins weren't buried together because they were loved, but because they were feared. In some cultures, twins were considered omens, portents, dualities that challenged the natural order, too symmetrical, too balanced, the living embodiment of a question the gods didn't want asked. So maybe the masks weren't gifts. Maybe they were seals, coverings, a way to close off the face, the mouth, the eyes, so nothing could come back. And then there's the strangest part, the gold itself. It wasn't local. Isotopic analysis showed that the material came from a mine over 700 miles away, which means someone carried it, shaped it, and brought it here, not for royalty, not for a temple, but for two tiny faces in a shallow grave. You don't do that on a whim. This was planned, which means this wasn't the first time. Maybe not the last. Were these the only twins buried like this? Or just the only ones we found? Local oral tradition offers no clues. The area is sparsely populated today. Villagers speak of the site only in passing. They call it La Zona Quieta, the quiet zone, not haunted, just watched. Animals avoid the area. Birdsong is faint. No one builds nearby. Not out of superstition, they say, out of instinct. A few archaeologists believe the burial could be part of a larger ritual cycle, one that's been erased over time or hidden intentionally. The masks may have once belonged to a known tradition, long since abandoned. But if that's true, why are there no records, no murals, no carvings, no echoes? Only gold, only silence. Some researchers have proposed that the twins were meant to represent balance, that their mirrored appearance reflected in each other's gaze was part of a cosmological rite, day and night, life and death, two halves of a whole, and the gold A kind of spiritual alloy, a metal that could hold not just light but memory. Some cultures believed gold had no shadow, that it couldn't be stained, that to wear it was to be made pure. But then, why cover the mouth? Why cover the eyes? Maybe the masks weren't just covering their faces. Maybe they were removing them. Because a face is identity, and sometimes identity is too dangerous to leave behind. That's why it lingers. The image. Two golden masks barely the size of a human palm, pressed against bone, reflecting nothing, saying nothing, but asking everything. What happened here? Who were they? And why did someone go to such extraordinary lengths to make sure that even in death, they would remain unknown? You can't stop thinking about it, because it doesn't feel like they were just buried. It feels like they were hidden. So tonight, as the air around you slows, and the quiet curls in like fog, picture this. Two infants in the dirt, wrapped in silence, their faces sealed in gold, not forgotten, not remembered, just watching each other, still. And maybe in some way, we can't explain, still watching you. They were just footprints. At first glance, nothing special, shallow impressions pressed into the soft earth of a dried lake bed in what is now White Sands, New Mexico. The kind of thing you might make with your bare feet after a morning rain. Dozens of them, snaking in a gentle curve, like someone had wandered across the mud and then disappeared into time. But these weren't recent. They were ancient, and they weren't alone. Excavated in the late 2010s, these footprints changed everything we thought we knew about the earliest humans in North America. Some dated back more than 21,000 years, far older than expected, predating the Clovis culture and long-held theories about migration patterns. They belonged to adults, teenagers, and even toddlers, families, groups, people moving together. But the most haunting set, those belong to a single individual, carrying a child, step after step, pressed deeply into the wet ground, turned back once retraced, then returned again. walking, alone. You don't need to be an archaeologist to feel the story in that. A parent, likely a mother, crossing a vast stretch of empty terrain, a child in her arms. The footprints deepen where she shifted the child's weight. They stagger slightly. One slips in the mud, then she turns around, retraces her steps, then walks the same path again. What was she doing? No one knows, but it's the kind of question that wraps around your ribs and won't let go. Let's pause here, because footprints are different from other artifacts. Tools, bones, pottery. These are things people made or left behind. Footprints. Footprints are presence, not a symbol, not a message, a moment, frozen in soil. This person walked here. You can measure her stride, her pace, her weight shift. You can see where she paused, where the child adjusted in her arms, where she looked back, and you realize you are standing exactly where she stood. Not roughly, not near, exactly. That's not history. That's contact. But then things got stranger. Further down the trail, another set of prints overlapped hers. A giant ancient animal, likely a giant sloth or mammoth, had walked over the same path. Its prints intersected hers, stepped into hers as if tracking, or following, or searching. The size difference is staggering. Her human prints are small, even delicate. The creature's massive, wide as dinner plates, heavy enough to press deeply into the same mud even millennia later. But here's the part that lingers. The sloth hesitated. Its stride breaks where it reaches her trail. It shifts sideways. It moves around her path, not through it. As if it sensed something, as if it knew she had been there and chose not to follow. That's not typical animal behavior. That's awareness. And it's not the only case. Multiple tracks at White Sands show these strange overlaps, human steps mingling with now extinct megafauna. Mammoths, sloths, camels, even saber-toothed cats. Paths crossing, lives intersecting. Silent decisions captured in mud, now turned to stone. But the woman with the child, that one is different. Because of the return, she didn't keep going. She turned around, retraced her steps perfectly, then vanished. Was she delivering the child somewhere? Bringing it back? Was it a burial? Was it a journey? Some say she left the child behind. Others think she carried it both ways. But the footprints speak clearly she walked with urgency. Her gait lengthens. Her feet slide more. And then the prints fade, covered by time, by dust, by memory. Some people call this a migration record, proof of ancient settlement, scientific confirmation. But others, especially those who live nearby, call it something else, the ghost trail. They say you can still feel her if you stand there at dawn. The light low, the air sharp, that sense of someone just ahead of you. Bare feet on cold earth, carrying something precious, moving with purpose, then vanishing like breath on glass. A few stories claim that on quiet days, when the wind is still, you can hear a child laughing out across the flats. No one's ever caught it on tape, but everyone who's heard it says the same thing. It doesn't sound sad. It sounds remembered, and maybe that's the point. These footprints aren't fossils. They're choices. They're love, fear, motion. They're a parent carrying a child through a world full of creatures, far bigger, louder, older. And they left nothing behind but this. And somehow, it's enough, because tonight, as you lie under your blanket and the air cools around you, imagine walking barefoot across damp earth, holding someone close, watching the horizon, and feeling something large move behind you, but not daring to look. You walk faster. You turn. You walk back, and maybe you whisper something into the wind, something you hope the earth will keep. And it did. There is a cave in the southern reaches of France where time forgot how to move. It's not well lit, not part of a tourist route. Hidden beneath the limestone cliffs of the Ardèche River Valley, this place waited in darkness for over 30,000 years before anyone stumbled upon its secret. And when they did, when modern eyes pierced that ancient blackness, they didn't find bones or fire pits or tools. They found hands, painted hands, dozens of them stenciled along the walls of Chauvet Cave. Negative imprints created by blowing pigment around an outstretched palm, deliberate, careful, placed with meaning. They float beside animals. Horses galloping in ghostly herds, rhinos clashing, lions pacing in shadow, and in between them, all those hands. Some are large, some are child-sized, some have fingers missing, deliberately folded, or never drawn at all. And here's what gives you chills. Many of them face outward, as if reaching not into the cave, but through it, toward you. Archaeologists call them negatives, but they don't feel passive. They don't feel absent. They feel active, present, like echoes that decided not to fade. One handprint in particular appears again and again. Same size, same finger length, same spacing. It belongs to a man, maybe middle-aged, judging by skeletal comparisons. He had a crooked little finger on his right hand, which made his print easy to spot, and he left it all over the cave. Here, there, above a lion, beside a bison. Over and over again, the same hand, not painting animals, not narrating a hunt, just pressing. You can almost hear it. I was here. I saw this. I need you to remember. Let's sit with that, because we often think of history in terms of things, artifacts, weapons, architecture. But this is contact. This is a person, soft flesh, rough palm, breath, carrying pigment, saying in the only language they knew I was alive. And I wanted someone to know, and somehow they knew you'd be here 30,000 years later, looking at their hand, feeling your own twitch and response. It's not just art, it's a conversation. And what they painted wasn't random. The animals are layered, superimposed. Some have 8 legs showing movement. Some are stacked in patterns that mimic rhythm or breathing. This wasn't idle scribbling. This was a sequence, a story, maybe even a ritual. Some researchers believe the cave was used for initiation, that only certain people entered, that the further you went into the cave, the more sacred it became. And at its deepest point, a bear skull placed gently on a flat rock, surrounded by footprints. The footprints of a child. One child. They walked around the skull, alone. What does that mean? No one knows. But that footprint, still pressed into clay, after 300 centuries makes your breath catch. Because you've stood in mud. You've left footprints, and you never thought they might outlast empires. But his did. The child. The man with the crooked finger. The hands on the wall. They're all still there. Not as ghosts. As witnesses. And maybe that's the most haunting thing of all. Not that they died, but that they expected us. These weren't primitive people grunting through life. These were minds like yours. Hearts like yours. People with dreams, fears, parents, children, songs, and a need to be seen. That's what the handprints are. A reaching, not for food, not for fire, for memory, for someone someday to stand where they stood and say, I see you. So tonight, as your eyes begin to close and the world around you quiets, picture this, a dark cave, the smell of stone and old air, the flicker of firelight casting shadows on lions that never moved. and a hand just one pressed to the wall. Red ochre sprayed across the skin, then lifted, leaving the shape behind, still waiting, still watching, still hoping that someone will understand what it means to touch stone and be remembered.